There is a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And is there a bear in the woods? What do you think, Levi?
No.
I love, by the way, that was obviously a Reagan
yeah,
ad from 1984,
yeah.
Which was partially in honor of a movie we're doing today from 1984. But I love that there's all that, and then at the very end it says, if there even is a bear. Like,
yeah.
Well, maybe not. I don't know. But
wouldn't you like somebody who's prepared?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about the 1920s the other day because we were talking about the book we're reading.
Good old
about
days, right?
World War II, and I was talking about the Great Depression and how Germany had been in its own depression after World War I during that time. Talked about how we eventually got into our Great Depression and just talked about how what a just moral rot the 1920s was. I said, only really alongside the 1980s is it kind of the worst that we ever had, and I kind of moved on. And some of the kids were like, well, wait, what's so bad about the 1980s? And I just kind of shook my head and just kind of stood there and was like, that would get into a lot of specific political opinions that I have that I'm not prepared to go into right now. Ask me some other time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, no, what is it? I was just like, no, we got to move on. But yeah, so it's like, don't you want to be prepared if there's something bad going on? Like, I mean, I guess so, but then everything that went along with that was...
They're like, no, we want to hear about the vice presidency of George H.W. Bush.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Iran-Contra, all that fun stuff.
Right.
Our pairing today...
Speaking of Iran-Contra, Modern Warfare... Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2.
Do you want to give a review of that?
Well, I'm going to actually write a really long... Because I finished it last night. I'm going to write a really long review of this that'll be on my blog. It's overall... I've been replaying it today also a little bit. I've liked it a little better the second time. It's just a lot... I have a lot of random thoughts about it that I'm not actually going to go into right now. But just to say that it uses, obviously, like this last Modern Warfare game did, a lot of modern events, recent current events, to its own benefit or detriment, whatever, I don't know. And let's just say it's a lot like, there's elements of it that are a lot like Sicario 2 of trying to kind of...
Day of the Soldado.
Right. Trying to equate terrorism and immigration. This game does a better job of saying, no, that doesn't really track. And, I mean, it has characters in the game that are very omnipresent of Hispanic or Mexican federal special forces who are, like, you know, in the game a lot and act as a counterpoint to the villainous aspects of the cartel that's in the game. But I don't know. It all just kind of plays into a lot of fear-mongering and, you know, that
it boils down to brown people are bad.
Right, yeah, because
way.
it's that and then the Iranians and it's like, okay, so you got the Russians who are doing some stuff, then you got the Iranians, then you got Al-Qatala, which is basically an Al-Qaeda analog, and then you've got the cartel, and it's like, who's doing what? I don't care. I want to shoot the peoples. But the thing that happens, though, over the game, my biggest problem with the game, and I think I haven't really heard this elsewhere as much, but it seems like to me that the game just has a lot of gimmick missions. Like, oh, this mission, you're sneaking around doing this. And there's just not as much just like action gameplay as there normally is.
I was going to ask, how does it compare to 1? Or the most recent reboot?
Not as good as far as that. I mean, it's a really well-made game, and there's a lot of really good missions in it. But it's like a lot of stuff like, oh, you guide somebody to do this, like over a camera, or they kind of did that in the last game too, or you're in the AC-130 again, or you're sneaking around, or you're jumping between cars to do the. It's a lot of gimmicks. Like, it seems like every mission's a gimmick, and there's just not as much just basic shoot 'em up action, which sounds kind of like lame brain. But I'm not coming to these games to like have all these cool little like, oh, this thing, that thing. Like, I got to sneak up behind somebody and stick them with like a thing to knock them out so we can interrogate them in Amsterdam, and it's like, that's basically not even a mission. It's just kind of like you're just walking around. There's one mission literally where you get captured kind of intentionally by the cartel so that they can ask you questions. It's like, this isn't a quiz show. I wanted to play the game, like, you know. And so that's kind of my thing about the game, is that it has way too many gimmicks going on. It should have just been more of. But then at the same time, I think, well, isn't that what all these games are? And isn't it nice that it's trying to do something different? Yeah. So I don't know. I have a lot of conflicting feelings about the game, but overall, I like it. It's good, but it's not as good as the other one. There's gonna, of course, be a third one. I mean, of course, Shepard turned evil. It's like, whatever.
Done that before.
And I haven't been totally sure about this, but I'm pretty sure, because these are all, soft reboots of those original great games. But what was great about those games was, and it was interesting, that they came around the same time as like the Nolan Batman movies and some of these other, like, oh, we need to make these things more realistic. But those games just had such a more fluid, intentionally world-ending, apocalyptic nature to them.
These have been a scale back.
This has been trying to be very stiff and arch and realistic, which is cool to a certain extent. But also, it just takes away I'm just here to play a game. Yeah. And a lot of people would say, why don't you just play the multiplayer? Because that's ultimately what most people come to. I mean, I was talking to one of my favorite students this week, and they were like, yeah, I'm just playing the multiplayer. I haven't played the campaign yet. And I was kind of like, what did you buy the game for? I don't know. Because he was saying, yeah, the guns suck in it or whatever. And I was like, I mean, I honestly was thinking, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to try them out much because I keep walking around doing this thing, doing that thing, But yeah, it feels it's kind of actually a lot like Mass Effect 2, where it's kind of it's like after the first game, but setting up for another game almost. It feels kind of, but this is a really long game too. It's actually one of the, I wouldn't be surprised if it might be the longest. I'm not sure. And out of that, there's just not, and playing it again, there is more of the action stuff than I had thought the first time, but it still feels like it's kind of lacking on that. And so to me, my answer to that is, I don't know, I play these for the campaigns. I don't play them for the multiplayer. Like, this is what the banner thing is.
You know who I'd love to play video games with in a multiplayer lobby is Jim Jarmusch and the Farrelly Brothers. I think that'd be a really sick crew, I think, to game with. But since we can't do that, we can talk about their body of work.
I just went no scope on you. Like,
is Stranger Than Paradise from 1984 and Dumber Than Dumber from
Dumb and Dumber
1990.
You said Dumber Than Dumb.
Dumber Than Dumb.
Dumber Than Paradise.
Yeah.
Stranger Than Dumb. Stranger Than
I
Dumber.
think Dumber Than Paradise is my favorite of those. But
Dumber Than Dumb and Stranger. I don't know.
This is I don't know if a dumb or strange Paradise or somewhere in the middle combination though. Yeah. These are two, as we said last week or our previous episode, two of my favorite movies in a roundabout way. Both very different movies, but both very funny in their own
they're very similar though. Actually, I think watching them and and they're both comedies, but in totally different ways. Like, in every way, they're different as far as what they think's funny.
Yeah. But both in their own way about a pair of deadbeats.
Right. And both in the end involve, like, a weird, like, either ransom transaction or drug deal transaction,
and a little bit of mistaken identity,
Right, yeah.
and so they do have a random amount of similarities. This is my favorite pairing we've done so far of those since we've been pairing up stuff. But
Day of the Dead and Addams Family Reunion didn't tickle your fancy.
Didn't tickle your fancy, okay? But yeah, that was interesting. I will say, Addams Family Reunion.
Coming at you now.
But we gotta. It's been a while.
Yeah, like we cooked Thanksgiving dinner early.
Yeah.
You know, we got a lot on the plate here for the Blue Plate Special.
You gotta.
Yeah, not us.
Not us.
No, you gotta.
You gotta dive into the Blue Plate Special.
Hi, Audrey. Norma, can I have a cup of coffee, please? Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who wants to watch pepperoni? Coming up!
Barbecue bacon burger.
Right here.
As they say, right here. Bacon.
So it's after the fact. Oh, it's after Halloween. Oh, who cares? Whenever we saw it before Halloween, for what it's worth. But finally getting around to talking about Halloween Ends, which is the third film in the recent David Gordon Green trilogy. I don't know. It's not. It's obviously not a reboot. It takes into account the.
Who knows what these movies are?
Okay, so definitely
anymore.
a sequel to the first one. Is it a
right.
sequel to the second one even, though? Or is it even kind of disregarding that?
Are you talking about the original Halloween 2?
Yeah.
No, it is a sequel to the original Halloween, that first one of these newer ones. Disregarded that.
It disregarded even other versions that Jamie Lee Curtis herself has been in prior to these. But I gotta say, I kind of I went in on this with very low expectations. I don't know if I'd say I love this, certainly, but it's my favorite of the three recent films, and actually goes in a lot of surprising directions that I was not expecting.
Yeah, I went in really expecting to hate this and walked away like, that was actually all right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not great, and I didn't love it.
And I don't want to overemphasize this part, but it has less Michael Myers than I was expecting. He is more so than in 1 and 2, I feel like. He's almost like this, more like the shark in Jaws in the sense of people responding to him. Now, the second one had elements of that, but the second one also had a lot of those flashback elements too with him.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what's that actor? He's in Yellowstone. He's in
Will Patton.
Will Patton, his kind of the flashback of his character back in that,
What are you doing with Rosetta Stone learns Chinese? Japanese. Sorry, Japanese. It was what it was.
So I was pretty surprised and shocked that I even liked this, frankly, because I really was pretty nonplussed by the first movie, the first of the rebooted whatever sequel movies. The second one I just outright did not like. I remember we talked about that on the Beetlejuice pod. This one I did actually like a good amount more. And I think a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with Corey being kind of such this new character that's introduced.
Yeah, played by Rowan Campbell.
And I was frankly shocked that they're kind of this deep into these movies and not only have the courage to introduce a new character like this, but like to have him occupy as much of the real estate of the film as it does. And as I said, it's almost kind of setting him up to be, quote, the next Michael Myers, not literally by, he literally tries to put on the mask and almost act as though he's Michael Myers, but even in a more, larger sense,
right,
metaphorically be the next Michael Myers. And also the fact that it's willing to, give him more of an emotional weight and, frankly, backstory than Michael Myers ever received from any of these movies, even though maybe apart from the Rob Zombie movies, which are totally their own thing.
Right.
But in general, how do you think this movie fit into these most recent movies and then the Halloween franchise in general?
And it skips a lot of some years between, because I know that that second Halloween Kills was literally right after the first movie.
Yeah.
Kind of like Halloween 2 was originally, the original Halloween 2.
Yeah.
So I'll get so confusing.
Yeah.
Not the Rob Zombie Halloween 2, the original Halloween 2.
Yeah.
Funny enough, this is the best movie since Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie movie, to have been made.
Right. Well, let's stop for a second
yeah.
and talk about those two movies, not in depth, but don't you feel like there's a lot of alternate history now being written about people who now really love the zombie movies, especially Halloween 2, in comparison to maybe these David Gordon Green movies? And it's interesting is because obviously the zombie movies are much more doing their own thing in their own lane, and then that these are very clearly trying to retrace the work done by Carpenter in the original film, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then now everybody's trying to act like, oh, I always loved Rob Zombie's Halloween movies.
No, people hated those forever, and we've liked them pretty much since we've seen them. I'm not as crazy about the first one just because it's halfway interesting, then it just becomes, oh, let's just do Halloween again. Halloween 2 is at least, oh no, let's do these things. And this is kind of what that is. It's more of that type of movie, Halloween Ends, that it's... like I said, starts with these new characters, and it's interesting that you think, oh, Michael Myers is going to show up in the first scene, but it's like, no, it's of a totally different other suspense that is shocking and weird. It's kind of funny how it's like Michael Myers just like hiding out in like a storm drain, basically, and that like, and I don't know what he's in there eating. I guess he's eating rats and people. I don't know. It's kind of vague. It seems like it's like, what, is he like a cannibal or something?
Well, it's almost already established that he's not a human being anyways, considering how the second one ended. I mean.
Right. But yeah, so he's barely in this, and obviously this is a spoiler about the movie, so if you haven't seen it, I guess, and if you care at all, then don't listen to this part. I don't know why you want to hear us talk about this movie anyway, but, you know. But the whole Corey character quite literally becomes the new Michael Myers based on his trauma of having accidentally killed this kid.
But he was like babysitting,
right? And the kid was playing a prank on him, acting like Michael Myers was there, and he like kicked the door so hard,
slammed the door open,
and the kid fell off the stairs and died. Like, it's like a really big like what?
Yeah.
Based on that, the way people treat him and kind of being bullied, and then he gets in this relationship with the main female character that's been in a lot of these movies that was
Jamie Lee Curtis's granddaughter?
Right, yeah.
Laurie Strode,
Andy Matichak, or Matichak.
Allison was her name.
Right. And
it was her mother that was Judy Greer's character, right? That got killed at the end.
Yeah, very unceremoniously, yeah. And her father was that guy that was in Blonde recently, and then had been in Carnival, I think. Yeah. That like real annoying guy. Can't remember his name. Anyway, and so there's all this stuff going on, and there were portions of that movie I really loved where it was like quite literally doing this whole like because there was like scenes of him killing people, and then them like riding on a motorcycle, and it was like. Trying to do that whole, interestingly though, trying to do that whole Badlands or like, you know, Lovers on the Run thing, but it was in a different way that was like, no, he's not wanting to go anywhere, he's just wanting to stay, and they're planning on leaving because the town's so screwed up.
Yeah.
But there were sequences of that I found very compelling, even in ways that moves in the 80s, because it felt very much like an 80s movie, but I felt like an 80s movie never did anything like that, where it was like, it was always casting that sort of character in a more positive light, like, oh, look at how sad they are, or, oh, something's going on with them, but it's they're being attacked or whatever. But from this, it was like, no, he's totally lost his mind and is a murderous psychopath. Like,
yeah. Know. And I mean, it gradually ratcheted that up.
Right, it didn't happen immediately. Yeah. And so all that was just so new.
And not that you're wanting Michael Myers to show up, but you are kind of like, wait, is this a Halloween movie?
And honestly, the movie would have been even better if he wouldn't have been in it. If they would have just been like, no, yeah, like if they would have actually killed him at the end of that movie, and then they say, oh, we've got one more movie.
And it's then like about this kid maybe trying to be the quote next Michael Myers, but that, you know,
right.
But there is no official Michael Myers in it, you know.
So that, in that way, it kind of felt weird because then the movie gets to the point where it's like, all right, Corey's dealt with. He gets killed at the end.
Oh, but and by the way, real Michael Myers shows up.
Right, and then it's like, oh, now he's here.
And that feels so perfunctory as a climax.
Right, because it's like, oh, we have to wrap this up. It's like, Yeah, first of all, you never needed to wrap it up because the movies never needed to be made, and also you should have ended the last movie with his death.
Mm-hmm. He definitely died in this one.
Yes,
they literally the whole town had a funeral procession basically where they threw him
in the garbage compactor, and it literally showed the shot of his. These movies get more and more violent. It's actually quite impressive, honestly. It's I know we've talked about that a lot the last so many years about these movies and then the Don't Breathe movies, especially the second one, but just the awful violence that happen. And it's can it get worse? And then somehow it always does. And it's just I mean, this is quite literally one of the most violent movies I've ever seen. It's just to the point where...
You said that about the second one, too,
I mean, to the point where it's almost not even remarkable. It's just kind of whatever. Yeah, because there was that part... kind of made me laugh. Well, there's that whole character in the movie that's... Let me find what his name was. I just forgot. That guy that was the Karan Harris's Willie the Kid, a local radio DJ.
Yeah.
And he's in the movie very prominently and annoyingly. And I remember we were watching it and we were like, all right, what's this going to be?
Yeah, right.
And it's that's all anybody in the town listens to.
This radio station and keep showing it. So it's
they should have done more of that, like Samuel Jackson in Do the Right Thing. They didn't even put enough effort into it, though. It was kind of, it was just annoying. No, time out.
Yeah.
And they kind of did something like that, honestly, in Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie Halloween 2 with Ken Foree's character in that was kind of a somewhat similar. I think he was a strip club owner or something. But they did kind of a similar thing with that where it was just why are we doing this? But literally there's that part where he goes in and cuts his tongue out with a pair of scissors or something. And then he puts it on the needle of the record and it keeps hitting it. And that's kind of funny in a really gruesome way. But it's just stuff in this movie that happened, it just gets so bad that, I mean, it was in that second movie, there was that boyfriend of that main girl character who literally it showed he got his head caught between the posts of a stair
I forgot about that.
Stair, what do you call that, the stair rail, the post, and he literally takes his head and literally just breaks his neck and turns his head around or whatever, and it's just okay.
And then all the things that were done to Michael Myers that, of course, didn't.
Yeah, right. And then in this, it was he got stabbed. But literally, they had him laying on the island counter in the kitchen, stabbed all these places. And then it's the thing that gets him is we cut his throat. It's that's what killed him. Okay. But anyway, so ultimately, and interestingly, this movie randomly with its opening credits and closing credits tries to be even more vintage with its font, and it just gets kind of tiresome. But I mean, overall,
but that's how it looked in 1978 in the movie. So that means this one's good.
It's
right?
2022 is what it is, by the way.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, all that aside, I think that everything else that's there was honestly a step forward for slasher movies, is saying, well, what about this thing?
Especially dealing with the epidemic it's ongoing of angry white men,
Yeah, and we've kind of seen that with Scream already. I think if we wouldn't have had Scream, it would be even more interesting. That movie's whole connection to Columbine is very fascinating, obviously, but that I feel this would have been even better had that movie not obviously existed, but then it's Scream is great and this is not. But it's
I guess they announced this whole project would be a quote trilogy some time ago, and so I guess if they as they should have done, again killed Michael Myers in the second movie, there'd been a lot of people but where's the Michael
then that
Myers
would have been
at?
similar to the original Halloween 3 season of The Witch, which didn't have this is all just nonsense, by the way.
But actually a good surprise.
No, it was. Movie. It actually was, and that's what's so even more frustrating about the movie in its own way is that it wasn't just bad. It was actually it's kind of sort of good, but there's all these other things that are going on that just dilute it.
Yeah.
Wanted more Will Patton, obviously.
Yeah,
what are you doing with beef jerky and supermarket? Like, what are you going to do with a can of vegetables? Like, which is all referring to Armageddon, of course.
But him and Lori finally got their storybook ending, It's
just like, what? Like,
and not that I'm saying I think Laurie Strode should die and suffer, but I feel like after everything that these movies have put her through, for her to have a kind of a happy ending didn't exactly make a lot of sense.
My favorite moment in the movie was when she was like, I'd like to report a suicide. And like fakes her suicide.
Because she just knows.
Because she just knows that Michael Myers is going to show up.
Well, at first, wasn't it even him? It was
the other guy.
Yeah.
But that, like, she's like sitting there waiting. And then, like, she shoots the, like, random, like, pumpkin that's on the, like... But by the way, who would keep a pumpkin in their house like that? This is so weird. But anyway, and then she's like, basically, you're terminated ever. That kind of like attitude, where she's like waiting on him or whatever. But yeah, at first, for a few seconds, I was kind of like, wait, did she really do that? And I was like, no, of course not. Yeah. But, it's another funny thing about that we joked about is, like, she was rewriting the last page of that friggin' book the whole movie. Mm-hmm. It was like every scene, it was a different ending. Like,
well, in many ways, they were rewriting Halloween history.
I know,
it's
film,
like... But
All
again...
Hallows Eve history.
Actually...
Well, that's why it was called Halloween Ends, because it was like, there's so many endings to this book.
Yeah. But actually, a surprisingly good movie. Not great. I mean, and again, I feel like having Michael Myers be in it perfunctory, it was very just... Again, takes away from what the point of the movie is almost trying to be, but... I don't know. Again, the best out of these three movies. These recent ones,
a whole lot more to say about that.
The Devils... from 1971, which Levi got recently on VHS.
Yeah, because you can't see it anywhere else.
Which was a good way to see it, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it streamed on Criterion Channel about a year ago or something.
I don't know why this isn't on Disney Plus and it's not easily accessible.
I know. It's kind of weird.
Wow, what a movie! I've not really seen any.
Why was this not on Kids WB? Years ago. That's what
I've not really seen any of Ken Russell's work. I'm aware of it. He was British director, right?
Yeah.
I believe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this movie was... I know it had a reputation, but to see it... And again, to see it on grainy VHS almost added to the aesthetic of what's going on and what it's about. It's reminiscent of a variety of things. One of the most biggest, obvious things it reminded me of was Black Narcissus, the Powell and Pressburger movie about, nuns and the craziness that comes from nunnery in some ways, and also just these kind of how zealotry can very easily get off track and off base, and someone who is like an incredibly powerful person can within minutes or moments be this vilified, hated, mocked leader in some way who's disgraced and is kind of on the path towards being executed. What was your takeaways from The Devils?
Well, it's a movie that I've anticipated a lot. It's strangely one of the most beloved movies on film Twitter now.
Yes.
I think partly because it is so hard to be seen, and I wrote this in my review of the movie as well, and we, coming to the movie as Christians, obviously did not react the way most people did to the movie when it came out. But I
think Ken Russell was himself a Catholic.
I think so.
Was a Catholic,
right? But I think it is very easy now for most mainstream, liberal progressive cinephiles to just accept the movie at its base level of yes, religion is evil, and just because we live in such an agnostic and atheistic culture now that I can find that believable. But otherwise, I mean, and also just because the movie's so shocking. But otherwise, I think it is so strange that the movie has seen this weird second life in the last so many years because it's such a abrasive experience. We even watched an even shorter, even more censored version of the movie that was put out in the 90s on VHS. I know there's a version that's about 10 minutes longer that has even more stuff in it that I know about but wasn't in the movie. I mean, it's just really one of the best movies I've ever seen, frankly. I mean, it's just true. And not even everything of what it says, which I think is all very kind of in its own way obvious and perfunctory, like to use that word again. But one thing that was very important about it was its kind of connection to the Ireland and what was going on in Northern Ireland at the time of kind of the Troubles and all the kind of Protestant and Catholic divide. In the movie, like I said, if Russell was Catholic, which like I said I think he was, then it's even more interesting that the movie comes off as so anti-Catholic and kind of not exactly pro-Protestant, but like, saying, oh, well, what? But all of that is just to say that obviously to totally, say that either way, one way or the other, or to say, oh, it's this or it's that, doesn't really fit the movie anyway.
Right.
But even still, those statements are so grandiose that I find it very fascinating, that they would be made by people of that time period. But the movie is so, it feels a lot more modern than its time, and it being a British movie, I think, is interesting. The British censors were a lot harder on movies by that point than America was, interestingly. Yeah. But that, because I was thinking a lot about other movies that came out in 1971, like A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, and there were certain
Straw Dogs,
things
which are both about England
remind
as
me
well,
of, yeah.
made by not people who are not English, interestingly.
Those
who
two
lived
movies,
there, as far as Kubrick. But yeah, that it's interesting, because I thought a lot about, and I mentioned this in my review, Baz Luhrmann, the Safdies, that make these movies that are maximalist and so fast, and they have this rhythm to them that it feels like you're never stopping or having time to think or do anything, and that I hadn't seen a movie that old that had done that, know, and so that felt like a very still modern approximation of
it felt like there were moments you were seeing that were sped up,
right?
And
so. In that, and Scorsese was probably one of the first to kind of do that.
Which there is that scene. There's this
Taxi Driver
sex scene towards the beginning of Clockwork Orange that does have that sped up element to it,
right? But that, and it's not even literally sped up, but just everything feels like it's happening so fast you're not able to digest all of it, and just honestly, and I think that's why it appeals to people now so much, is it's still entrenched in this modernity.
Yeah,
but also just the mise-en-scene of the movie was so detailed and so emblazoned with just vice,
both the interiors and the exteriors.
Because like there's that one great, probably one of my favorite moments in the movie is just this shot of when it's like the woman that Grandier was with at the beginning of the movie, Oliver Reed's character, and he kind of tossed her to the side when it turned out she was pregnant, and her father is like yelling after him like, "Oh, you're a beast, or you're a devil," or whatever, and him just laughing back at it, whatever, and there's all these like fires everywhere and people screaming. It literally just feels, and like even a moment like that, which isn't even like the later sequences of the movie where it's literally all out chaos, like both inside and outside, but the whole, it just all feels like a Hieronymus Bosch painting, like unlike any movie I've ever seen, as far as it just really feels like a true approximation of hell. Which is interesting for a movie that is about ostensibly a faithful town,
in quotes,
but that obviously everything that goes along with that is just so
hypocritical or false.
Right. And so obviously the movie was very much, and that's what's so interesting about it too. And I said this in the reviews, that Oliver Reed's character at first is just seen as such an evil man, but then over time,
turns out he's not as evil as
right,
others,
and there's a recognition of that even within himself as it goes on that I think wouldn't be earned if he didn't recognize it over time. Because I feel like if the movie were just like, oh, he's bad, but these people are worse, it would just be like, okay, well, so what, But it's just, it is a nihilistic
he is still hanging
movie.
on to this pride and righteousness too.
Yeah, and so I think that that's fine, that sort of nihilism, obviously. But the thing that I do like about it is that he over time is like, well, no, I've made these mistakes, but what you're doing is this whole other thing, and trying to kill these people based on their, being Protestant and that whole idea, the kind of counter-reformation that was going on at the time. But that also I feel like the movie, and I don't necessarily have a problem with this, but I do feel like the movie is trying to like make him too much of a Christ-like figure in its own way.
Yes.
There's that one sequence that's the Vanessa Redgrave's character we haven't even mentioned yet at all, but that she's having this like
Dream,
fantasy
yeah.
about him, and I didn't mind that because that's all just her fantasy of whatever. I don't think that connects as much, but literally just the fact of his like burning at the stake is shown as almost like a Golgotha-esque event.
They're explicit visuals that make comparisons between him and Christ.
And so in that way, I was a little bit turned off by that, but that sequence is just so powerful. I mean, literally, I think the most like vile, awful moment in any movie I've seen in a while is when they've got like his baby. And the guy's like, "Oh, little beastard, it's not every day you get to see daddy burn," or whatever. Yeah. It's literally the most, like, vile, awful, disgusting moment of it's just like, wow. Yeah. Like, this is just so bad. Like, it's almost so bad all you can do is laugh. Like, it's just like... But the whole movie was great anyway, but I just found that whole sequence to be just so transcendent on a just cinematic level. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what's so great about the movie is that there's few movies like that have such a bombastic style and their narrative and thematic statements are so apt and long-standing that it kind of just a movie that has everything and it's weird to find a movie.
I don't
like
think
that,
it's necessarily going for quote realism. I mean, it goes for going for this stylized, as you said, mise en scene, but also emotional output that's radiating from it. But that it has this intensity that, again, I think is in keeping with just what the story's about and the kind of, again, like the perils of zealotry in many ways and just how awful and horrific that can be. And, you know, I don't know if what this, quote, genre this is. I guess like a psychological, historical drama, but
ultimately, I think
it shares DNA with a horror movie too. In a roundabout way,
score is very much a horror score, I think, and then it's also just about the time period itself in a lot of ways, and about the Black Death, and which it had, that had been a couple centuries before this time period, but that was still a present reality, and I just feel like it's like I said, it is objectively realistic because some of the architecture also that Derek Jarman, who would later be a famous director in his own right, but had created as a set designer, was a lot more of a modernist approach. But that I feel like that's all still very accurate to the time period in its own way too.
Certainly in keeping, if nothing else, with the thematics and the aesthetic.
Yeah, and it all looks almost like an institution, like rather than a nunnery or a monastery.
Then Vanessa Redgrave even has that line at one point where she's talking about women who decide to become nuns. I don't remember exactly what she says, but something along the lines of like women who are either kind of sexually frustrated or just don't have any kind of relationships or deformed and all these things. That those are the people that are nuns in this movie, and the pride and the righteousness, but also the sense of shame that comes with that for some of those women. Again, it's a pretty powerful movie, and hopefully one that gets some sort of a broader...
I feel like it will eventually. I mean, it's just so strange. I mean, and also what's interesting as a footnote to this is the whole just big mess that Warner Brothers is in right now over that HBO Discovery Plus crap, where it's like, that's like the last thing on their list right now is to put out the Devil.
Although it was those characters from this movie are depicted in the background of Space Jam and New Legacy, so
yeah, I mean, and another thing about the movie, this is kind of getting off topic with what we were just talking about, but the movie easily could be like 3 hours long.
Yeah,
because I feel like there's a lot of random character import that is kind of implied about random smaller supporting characters in the movie, but I just love how short it actually was, and it felt even shorter just because of the pace, and I actually liked that it was a little bit cut a little bit, because I know there's versions of it that supposedly were even longer. But I feel like it says enough on its own and to speak for itself.
So again, we watched this off Levi's VHS. Is it streaming anywhere in terms of being able to rent through Amazon?
I don't think it is right now. I know that it, like I said, it was for a little while on Criterion Channel. The like 2 hour version of it. This was like the hour and 45 minutes, so it's like a little shorter. Let me actually look and see. I don't think it is anywhere. Nope, none whatsoever. Because they've been really anal about that. Like they're not putting it out anywhere. And it's been pretty. I'm actually interested. They even put a VHS out of it in the '90s. I guess they just wanted to make a quick buck or something. I don't know. I don't know why that ever happened, because it was so immediately reviled and vilified by pretty much everybody.
And even a lot of pretty big establishment critics in the day were not a fan of it.
Right.
Ones you think would cut some slack. But
I don't know. Yeah. I think it was just that came at a particular time where a lot of those movies were being made. And it's hard to believe that there would be a movie that could upstage Straw Dogs and A Clockwork Orange.
And it's different, but like, say, Dirty Harry, even too, as being a controversial movie.
But it's like, but you know what? It's funny. It's the best of all those, too, and it goes the furthest. Yeah. And somehow makes it back and actually makes statements and feels like real human beings in a movie. Yeah. It's not like some game or something. Yeah. And it's not a very funny movie either. Like, each of these other movies operate on this certain sense of comedy, especially A Clockwork Orange, and this satire.
Or an irony, yeah.
And this is there's nothing funny about this movie whatsoever. Well, other than just the characters being so sycophantic to a point where you laugh, but that's not an intentionally comedic decision, you know.
Speaking of sycophants,
speaking of movies that are just a big laugh,
Tar,
which
we recently saw with two other random people at the AMC here in Hickory
at the 3:45 showing on Friday afternoon.
So Todd Fields directed 3 films.
In the Bedroom was the first one.
That was like around 2000 or 01. I can't remember exactly.
And then Little Children. Neither of which I've seen. You've seen Little Children.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the Little Children novel from Tom Perrotta. But really love the movie too and think about the movie a lot. Yeah, In the Bedroom was 2001.
They have like Tom Wilkinson in it or something?
Has Sissy Spacek, Tom Wilkinson, Nick Stahl, Marissa Tomei, and William Mapother, who is Tom Cruise's cousin.
Yeah. That was in Mad Men and
Lost and
Magnolia.
Yeah, a bunch of things. I'm a big fan of Little Children. I think like that kind of it got acclaimed when it came out, but it had like a lot of names in it who were either names then or would be a little bit bigger names like
Patrick Wilson,
Jackie Earle Haley, Kate Winslet. And
2 Watchmen actors in there randomly.
Jennifer Connelly. And it's like if you just say what the plot of the movie is, or the plot of the novel even too, it's like, kind of suburban, middle class, ennui problems kind of thing. But one thing I always remember about Little Children, and I think it's really well acted, really well written, really well directed. Kate Winslet especially is really great in the movie, as is Patrick Wilson. But the voiceover narration is unlike anything I've really ever seen in a movie. It's kind of from this above the narrative, like just this unknown narrator voice.
Oh, so it's not the characters.
No, it's not the characters in the movie. It's just this. But like it's. I don't think every movie should do that. But like as far as adapting a novel to the screen, it's one of the closer things I've ever seen as far as what that looks and sounds like and feels like when you read a novel. Of having
but it's
that
not.
Kind of top-down
I'm assuming it's not as showy as something like the Grand Budapest Hotel or which is very much like this is a story.
It's not like
more
that.
More subtle than that. I'm assuming
but it's like. It feels a little more intimate than, say, the narration in, like, say, maybe like Barry Lyndon is. Barry Lyndon feels like it's coming from this very, very hot place.
And that feels very literary, too. And it's, like, very, like, archly literary.
But this feels more like a voice just directly above your shoulder. It's not in your face, but it's not, like, way too high up like that. So that's just always something I always remember, and I think worthy of study and has probably been written by others. But so he hasn't made a movie in 16 years, and it's not because he hasn't tried to make one. I think he's had a bunch of projects that fell apart for whatever reason. But I mean, just looking at his work, I think of him very much as a contemporary of, say, somebody like James Gray, who has his own new movie out and is actually playing it. Hickory, actually, we might try to see
really?
that sometime
I didn't know that.
soon.
Yeah, we got to do that like this coming week or something.
But he's had various projects that have kind of come and gone. He's actually tried to adapt Blood Meridian. I'm looking here.
Really? Now that would be interesting to see him do that.
Let's see.
Which everybody's trying to do that.
He had
seems like now.
Tried to adapt a novel called The Creed of Violence, which is set during the Mexican Revolution, which at different times was set to star DiCaprio, Christian Bale, Daniel Craig. A coming-of-age minor league baseball story set in the 1970s Northwest. An adaptation of Blood Meridian. Political thriller called As It Happens, co-written by Joan Didion. An adaptation of Jesse Walters' novel Beautiful Ruins, and a film about U.S. soldier Bo Bergdahl, who he had been captured by
I remember his
Taliban. And then also even Jonathan Franzen's novel Purity, which is going to be a 20-hour limited series on Showtime. So he is, tried to get a lot of things done. And he said, speaking publicly for the first time in 16 years, Field told New York Times in 2022, quote, I set my sights in a very particular way of certain materials that was probably very tough to get made. So he's acknowledged that. His films, as you can tell, I'm sure from Tar alone, and I've only seen really Little Children and this, but you can see literally by the list of credits, he's very much trying to be a literary filmmaker.
Right.
He's very much interested in literally either adapting literature or making films that feel like literature, which I am all for.
Yeah.
I feel like not enough people are actually trying to do that, even directors I love. I think that's like
Andrew Dominic, we mentioned, was somebody who adapts a lot of literature, but doesn't make movies that are very literary. I mean, I feel like the most obvious version of that is the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford with its narration.
Mm-hmm.
That's another example of one that is very the narration is very literary sounding, which I love about it. But because that's actually one of my favorite things about that movie. But he still makes movies that feel very much like movies,
cinematic. Yeah,
and yet
I mean, Tar is cinematic, but not in a very obvious and showy way. I mean, what I really love about the movie, and it's one of my favorites I've seen this year, I think of it in certain terms like Memoria, and
That's
I think like Memoria,
it
has a very intentional sound design, and most movies are about sounds in a literal and figurative way. And what I love about this movie is, in a way that even Memoria doesn't quite have, is that you feel like there's a knife waiting around the corner at every given time, but the knife never comes down and stabs anybody.
Is so opaque,
and we won't say it, but Memoria actually has a revelation in the final moments that kind of is a confirmation of things you may have been thinking.
The tension of that movie is so different.
Yeah.
And with this, and there are elements of this that reminded me a lot of Opening Night. We were talking about The Clouds of Sils Maria as well. But specifically Opening Night, it has literally a ghost in the movie itself, or at least an approximation of like one in her own psyche. With this, there are some elements of that and certain things that happen, like the whole sequence, which is never explained whatsoever, that she follows that Russian cellist into like somewhere she's supposed to live,
an abandoned,
and it's like she
complex,
never asked any questions about that, because I would want to be like, where are you living?
But I guess she didn't want to even be embarrassed by saying that she was following her into that. Yeah.
But there are elements of the movie that engage in that sort of like
ambiguity or mystery.
But overall, like you said, it's not really like what I really loved about the movie. Something that was interesting is that the movie has this whole kind of false start to it.
Yes.
Where it's like has one kind of shot of like, and I want to talk about this in a little bit because we haven't actually talked about this movie in depth yet. But
ourselves,
the sequences of where somebody is like filming things and they're texting, and it's like unclear about who's texting who or who it is on the other side of the phone.
And then have like basically the credits in the beginning.
Right, and then there's like this really, really long sequence of credits that have some music over it. And then we jump into like a 10-minute long it's basically like a Lincoln Center like a thing you would watch on YouTube of like somebody going and giving.
Well,
a
I know
talk
Adam
and an
Gopnik
interview.
is a real New Yorker
Right.
podcaster and writer, and
yeah.
he was interviewing him, playing himself, interviewing Lydia Tarr, who
Right.
there's funny enough been confusion of on Twitter of some people thinking that she was a real person and this is an adaptation of her life, which is not true at all.
And that is what's so fascinating about the movie is that is just so slice of life and like very direct for a movie that is about very pretentious things, that it's very realistic.
And it's obviously, me and you don't know a lot about the classical musical scene, obviously.
No.
But you could blink or kind of squint and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. This person
Right.
would exist.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I'm sure
Yeah.
they're very much based on people. I mean,
yeah.
you know,
the only
real people.
aspect of the only aspect of the movie I found a tad unrealistic is just the fact it kind of treated her like a director or a writer. I just don't think that, at least in America anyway, maybe this is more the case in like Berlin where she lived or something, where I'm just
They're
like, I
treated
do
as
not
celebrity.
see that as being a celebrity anywhere.
Well, maybe it's
but-
like a celebrity within this very New Yorker, like,
Right.
highbrow,
Yeah.
elite world.
And that,
you
but
know?
it doesn't matter. I
Yeah.
mean, I can believe all that fine enough. But then it does have all those random elements of weird mystery and ambiguity and intrigue about it. And I didn't even know what the movie
there was like a
was.
hint of her time in South America that she had
Right.
studied, whatever. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
I don't
exactly
remember, yeah.
the details of.
But yeah, and like part of the movie too is this whole the whole aspect of the movie I knew nothing about whatsoever. Was that he or she rather is basically having this whole Me Too fallout on her whole career that I was not aware of. That there's a character named Krista Thomas or something that she had who it never shows in the movie whatsoever, kills herself, and it's that she was this young gonna be a maestro, and that it's implied that there was something that kind of happened,
And then also that Lydia Tarr frequently, anytime she comes up, emphasizes that she was just not right. She was mentally ill.
Right.
And I don't know, me as an audience member for a while, I bought as truth and may have been true, but then as the movie unspools itself, and I love a movie that it knows all of its secrets and it's not going to let you in all of them, and you know that you're just going to get a little bit more as the movie goes on, and she's not maybe telling all the truth about this, and
and there's a hint of that early on, and I
Yeah.
feel like what the movie's ultimately about is the question of how, and it's something that we've talked a lot about personally, mostly off air, the question of how, with these canceled individuals who have had these personal demons, how can you reconcile that with the great art that they produced? And there's a random amount of, and something that I'd never thought about before, but specifically with like conductors and like
which are their own
and
dictatorial
composers,
figures,
that all
similar
the
to directors
things
or
in
film
their
producers.
life that in their lives, whether it be they mention Mahler or Beethoven or whoever, all the awful things they did in their personal life. And I wonder honestly what like conductors or orchestra people think of that as this movie is like. Is that an accurate portrayal of that, or like? But like you said, I think it's that kind of dictatorial personality that people. But interestingly, that was what at the beginning I didn't know really how to react to that, because I was kind of like, what's this all about?
Are you talking about the scene where at Juilliard where she's giving that?
Yes,
she's giving this like talk, and
Right.
there's a student there who like doesn't like Bach because of things about
Bach,
his
that was
personal
the other
life,
one I was thinking of,
and she kind of, casts aspersions towards him, and she's like, well, yeah, you should be able to separate the art from the artist, and this and that. And then at first I thought this was a more hypothetical thing that she engaged in, but in actuality, perhaps it's her preemptively defending herself from things she's done,
and also because and I thought this is kind of a weird sequence, and I was kind of like, okay, moving on. That
was all shot very interestingly too. I mean, a lot of long takes, and
And then it was funny later when they somebody had filmed it and re-edited that.
Well, I just love too that
like,
it goes to what you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
like that. Oh, this composer got canceled over Twitter.
Right? It's like what?
What world is
right?
this?
Yeah.
You know, like I don't. It's fascinating.
But yeah, and then just also the fact that that I thought early on, because she's a lesbian in the movie, and that's a very big part of the movie.
She's
obviously.
married and has an adopted daughter.
And then there was that sequence where she went to the school and was talking to a kid that was bullying her child, and was in German, of course, because it's in Berlin. I will get you.
And no one will believe you.
No one will believe you because I'm an adult. Yeah. It's like God watches us all. And it's just what? But yeah, that ultimately I was wondering early on. I kind of thought, is this just Todd Field just putting this random statement in here?
Yeah.
But thankfully, and because thankfully he, I think, came to this realization of what I've come to is it's all so messy. I don't know what the answer is on that, about how do we reconcile that, because sometimes I feel like what she said, where it's but the art is still the art, but it's but so much of, but then she admits there's all these things of, this was dedicated to this person, or that their art, their life is so much a part of their art.
Yeah.
And that also something that I think contradicts all of her beliefs is the great. It's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movies, where she goes back to her old house in Staten Island where she was a kid, and she has a video on a VHS of Leonard Bernstein, who was
a
her,
mentor to her. Yeah,
literally turning around and talking to the audience and saying literally what I have been thinking the whole movie, which is my whole philosophy on art, is that he says it's not all about this thing and that thing, and you have to do
aspects,
all these little minutiae. It's about how it makes you feel.
And she cries to that. A very unemotional woman sees him saying that and cries to that.
And what is music but just a way to express feelings that we don't, and we're not able to express. I think the same way about movies most of the time, and music and art as well. And I was thinking that literally the whole movie. I was like, these people are so ridiculous, their pretensions, and but also he would, somebody who obviously has to say something like that and to be such a great artist would have to know about all the minutia. But I think that's the thing that she never learned from him and these other people, is that it's all about reflecting life and art. And I don't know much about Leonard Bernstein, about what his life was like.
By the way, that reminded me of this whole
movie that's going to come out,
Cooper's doing,
and we'll learn all about him. And I could literally look that up now, so I'm flying blind on this.
Yeah, right.
But it seemed like Bernstein was probably, in comparison to her, far more of a genial figure than she is, because she says this kind of early on in the movie, calling him a robot or whatever, and then as the movie goes on, she progressively uses that more, of saying, this woke crowd, these millennials doing this, and you start to realize, she's one of these types of people, of this is really what she believes, is this whole kind of the cancel culture is all BS and whatever. Because at first it seemed like it was more of, no, you need to recognize the art for what it is, that sort of thing. But as it goes on, it becomes a whole other thing. And I think that, like you said, that's what's so great about the movie, is it kind of unspools itself and before you, and that at first you're kind of like, why am I being told this? Why is this information important?
Yeah.
And
I was trying to pull up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This random thing. I was trying to figure out when. Anyways.
Hi. Oh, what you got there?
Sorry, I don't know what was going on.
It was worth it.
Yes. When it comes to lasting relationships, we're thinking of every Monday Tucson.
But actually, I was just looking, that Maestro movie's not coming out this year. I thought it was. I think it previously had been. The pictures, by the way, of Bradley Cooper in that are like, wow. They did
But like I said, I don't know about Leonard Bernstein. I would be contradicting myself by saying, but I'm just the geniality of him in that video on the VHS,
that
was such a different whole person from her.
That's also a way to talk about another thing too about this movie, is obviously we come from very working class blue collar backgrounds.
Yeah.
And this movie, I mean, the environments that this movie's typically taking place in is so far from our own life experiences. But it was fascinating when she all of a sudden goes back to where her childhood home is. Right. That's like, oh, that looks like a place I would know or I would be in, and that she's even in her own. She's getting her old VHSs, and then her like single scene interaction with her brother, who's very not of the world that she is now a part of in terms of this highbrow, high-end artistic scene. Yeah, he's very much clearly a working class guy, and he can, in 2 seconds, look at her and say, "Well, I know you're in some moral degradation at this point," and then just kind of shrugs her off, But that was just an interesting kind of thing, and this movie, is very much a part of a kind of a handful of locations, but then at the end is jumping around to a great variety of places, and literally and figuratively. And then again, that's the big thing about Todd Field's movies, what I've seen of this and Little Children. Little Children's a little more conventional, even though I hadn't read the novel by that point, and I have since. But again, it has some pretty interesting, sharp turns you're not quite expecting. But this movie like this is, again, 2 to 3 steps ahead of you at every moment, and I just, like I said, love the unspooling nature of it, that you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. And is not exactly as shocking, I think, as one of the trailers for it sold it as, but it does have moments of like dream sequences that are in there that are like, wait, what am I watching here? What's going on? And I always love to see those. We can talk a little bit about the ending. I don't know
before we get to that, though, I do want to say I just looked up about Leonard Bernstein, that he was actually a gay man that got married.
To a woman?
Yes. Yeah. And that he supposedly had these... Sort of. Yeah. But that he had these relationships with some younger men. I don't think it was anything, from what I was looking, I didn't think it was anything that was like predatory necessarily. But that supposedly they were still married, but were like moved out away from each other. But that she got lung cancer, and he actually moved back in with her to take care of her until she died. And that after she died, he kind of like, sort of didn't lose his mind, but kind of like, was really affected by that. And so it sounds like that it was similar things, but actually way more of a positive aspect to that, it sounds like.
Okay.
But that all, like I said, kind of to touch back on that, is almost a contradictory statement to her whole life anyway, or at least like I said, I'm not a scholar on any of this, but and another aspect of the movie I want to talk about real quickly before we do move to the ending, because I feel like we're going to talk about that the rest of the time, is that I felt like the metaphor of the whole movie was that when they come in to do rating sheets for who they want to like be in this certain position in the orchestra, they have literally this like wall, and the people sit behind it. I feel like that works as a great metaphor for like, we need to put the person's life behind the wall and only hear their music or whatever. Yeah. But that what happens is there's literally moments where she sees that girl's shoes, and it's like she knows instinctively what's going on behind there. And that in that way, I feel like Field's challenging us to say we still need to enjoy and take pleasure in the art, but don't try to totally just disregard the person's life,
or the impossibility of being able to do that.
And so that I really love. That was the eventual statement because it challenged me in my own way of thinking. At first I was kind of like, I kind of like that somebody's kind of saying some of these things, even though I still feel kind of weird about it. But then it was like, no, but actually this is what that person's really like. And then it made me think, oh, okay. And it's all a big mess. But I like that it admits that eventually. The ending of the movie. Now, I looked up about that. It wasn't explicit about where it was, but it said Southeast Asia. I'm assuming it might be like Thailand or Myanmar, maybe. But where do we even begin with that? Okay, so she got canceled, basically, and fired from all her posts.
Her marriage fell apart.
Right. She quite literally went into the, orchestra and pushed over
she's just like Mark
Strong's character.
It was really one of the only other bigger names in the movie, by the way. That's mostly the Cate Blanchett show, which she's only literally one of the best actresses working, so it's not like that's a problem. But so she gets canceled, and then she ends up we think getting ready to have this big reemergence in Asia. It's
Right.
like, well, she can't be doing anything in America and Europe, but hey, somebody somewhere is going to need some big composer to kind of have some big symphony, right?
And before we let the cat out of the bag, I recommend, if you haven't seen the movie, to go watch it. Mm-hmm. I hate even telling people that there is something at the end, because it's honestly a better experience to just go watch it and then be like, what the hell is this? But because you mentioned this is literally like the Beau Travail ending of its era. Just like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like,
it doesn't have that like
amount of shock exactly,
and also,
but like
that ending has a bit of a catharsis to it.
Yes,
it's like you kind of get caught up in the absurdity, but also the perverted beauty of it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is just like perverted, like, wait, what is going on here?
And then after the credits even roll, it's like this like techno music instead of like orchestra. It's just like, what? But yeah, so basically what happens is she gets a post as like, I don't even know how to explain it, but it says it on Wikipedia.
Let me read the Wikipedia page real quick about it.
But it's basically
sometime later, Lydia conducts an orchestra in Southeast Asia at a massage parlor / brothel, which we didn't really mention this. Yeah. She is instructed to pick her masseuse from a glass bowl. The escort's staged and framed like her orchestra. One girl looks up in Lydia's eyes, her position the same as Olga's. And
it was like, number 5 also, which was the symphony she was doing, and her symphony or her notes had been stolen. That was that number 5 too. So
on a tour of the local wilderness, Lydia sits behind a deafening waterfall in silence. Finally, she conducts her new orchestra and the score for the video game series Monster Hunter in front of an audience of cosplayers, and just like the way the camera's shooting them, and I remember too, like, it shows her walk in,
right,
and you're like, oh, she's gonna go to this big thing, and then like there's these screens to the side, and it shows these like flags waving. I remember being like, what is this? And then
I started laughing at that point because I was like, what?
And then the camera eventually basically turns around and it shows you all these cosplayers are sitting
and
there.
They're all sitting there, and they're not laughing.
No, they're taking it all very seriously.
And it's like something like I don't remember what all it said, but it's like I compared it to the song Tandem Jump, Jonathan Richman, where it's like, you will be scared or whatever. But like, and we were laughing about that, but it's like, it says something like, if you want to back out now. Like, it's trying to be this whole, like, we're going on an adventure kind of thing, but literally one of the most shocking endings to any movie I've ever seen, of just like, wait, what? Because that's what I loved about the movie, is that the whole time it was operating on this certain level of pretension, sort of like, oh, this is about these things, while also engaging in things, like you said, that were of a more literary nature, that were more inherently realistic.
Yeah.
But then also that it's like, this is what she's doing now. A very unpretentious...
Well, we'd already let the air out of the balloon a little bit with seeing the world of her brother and where she come from. And then so like, the question I have is, and this is by no means a criticism of the movie, it's just like us trying to unpack what this resolution means in reflection of the whole. Yeah. Is this like meant to play as a grim joke of some sort? Of like the final punchline of, well, look at where all this has gotten her, and like, and are we supposed to like laugh explicitly out loud at this? I think we are, but I'm just trying to assess the extent to which I said Haynes almost like Todd Haynes, but what Todd Fields is saying with like, is he also saying, another thing I thought of is like, this is the only really truly accessible way that anything like this makes its way before a popular audience?
I think that's part of it,
lowbrow way.
Yes, it's saying like, this is, and
that she's compromising herself against her will to do something like this,
right?
Because that's the only job she can get now,
and that's almost a reflection of the movie itself, is recognizing this is like an art house.
That's what I mean too. Is like the movie's almost commenting on, well, if Todd Field's like sold out and made a Transformers movie, or something.
Well, and I think that's also him thinking about all the trouble he's had with making movies, and that's its own statement of, these are the only things that get made now, or like art gets diluted into this like thing where people come and they dress up in these Marvel costumes and it's this big game. I think it is all that, but I think it's also just this hilarious. Like, genuinely hilarious. Like,
or also, it's like him, like, laughing at us, like, not in a condescending way, but think, did you think this was going to be something special?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Or to say, no, this is what happens to people like this. Like, ultimately, like, people who are of this artistic stripe, and then these things happen where they're canceled, and it's almost a question that we're still living with of what's going to happen to these people.
Yeah, right.
You know? It's kind of like what's happened with Armie Hammer selling like condos in the Cayman Islands or whatever.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It's like a similar thing. It's like, how are these people going to use their talents? What will they now use them for now that they're doing this? Mm-hmm. We've seen aspects of that before. I mean, and even like more recently with Atlanta, there was that great episode of the thing about like reparations.
Yeah.
And how there was that character that was like, I don't remember what he did, but he did some kind of like work at like a office, and now he's out working as a waiter somewhere. And we've seen aspects of these things happen in the last so many years of stuff like that, but this is the biggest version of that we've seen that I feel like is both, it's funny, it's kind of sad.
Are we sad for Lydia Tarr?
I am in the sense of like, that's really what you're doing. Now, I don't feel bad for her because of the things she's done. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, inherently, there is an aspect to, like, this person's life is ruined. I mean,
not that she's necessarily acknowledging the things she's done is wrong, but nevertheless, the fact that she cries when watching Leonard Bernstein shows that there is some deep humanity in her, and nonetheless, whether or not she regrets what she's done, she probably regrets it more in the sense of what it's cost her as opposed to what it cost other people.
Yeah, but it's funny, it's sad, it's profound, it's ridiculous, it means nothing, it means everything. It's just, it's one of those types of endings that you don't get but every so often of just like, wow, that. Yeah. Like, because there's nothing in the movie leading up to that would ever lead you to believe that's what that's going to be.
Right. And it's just like I said, it's like a final joke, but I think it's very well done because I don't think it's condescending to us as an audience, but I think it's 2 to 3 steps ahead of us, and it's like getting us to think it's this one thing before dropping down to this
and it's
other
also,
thing,
if you think about the audience that this movie's going to get, it's going to get those New York people, right?
Or those 4 people in Hickory on a 350 show.
But it's going to get people who are those Marvel fans aren't going to come see it, or Monster Hunter fans aren't going to come see it.
Other than if they're like, oh wow, I really love that girl in Thor 3 Ragnarok, like, let's see what else she's doing now.
Or if the Monster Hunter fandom is like, we have to see how we're represented, and like goes and waits the whole time for that or whatever. Maybe they're buying tickets like they did to see the Batman 89 trailer, but they walk in at the end of Tar. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel like, though, it's almost made for those people in its own way, of that kind of like bourgeoisie, like pretentious people to like put a pie in the face almost of like, no, look at this thing that you don't even know exists, by the way. It's like, it feels like it's like a lot of different things, which is the mark of a great movie and a great ending and a great moment of just like, what? Just wow.
Well, we haven't said much about her, but I meant this when I said so. Kate Blanchett to me is truly one of my favorite actresses, and I think she just kills it with this. I think this, and it's another thing too, is like when she was given that whole almost monologue at the beginning, which I knew nothing about most of the things they were talking about, but I just knew I was in these safe hands, and especially when she was talking about how, you know, the 2 hands of conducting, and that one does this, but the other, I think the right hand represents time, and that she controls time, and the illusion that there's a back and forth with the audience or with the orchestra, but in reality she knows every little bit of where the hand's going and how she's controlling time. And I literally felt in that moment in particular just kind of a relief of like the hands that I'm in with Field, of like he is that person,
and that he's leading us
with
to
the
Monster
movie,
Hunter.
and in that moment while he's directing that and while they're shooting that again, he knows we're going to Monster Hunter. You know what I mean? Just like he knows that I'm in control of this, and you don't know where we're going, but I do. And so,
and like, there's going to be a whole subplot about the weird family that lives next door, and the dog in the weird building, and like all these things.
All these other asides. And then there's the whole thing about like you said, the next door. There's the woman who's dying, and then her like daughter who's coming in and needs her help, and then she dies, and then like some of the family members come by after she's dead one day, and it's like what she first thinks they're complimenting the sounds and the music that comes by, that comes out of her place, but then they're like, we're like trying to sell this, and we don't want your like music coming out of here. And so then she's got the accordion saying whatever she says. I don't remember exactly, but the movie's just filled with all these surprises and then also mysteries too.
Yeah.
And then
because it's implied that all the weird symbols, stuff getting stolen, stuff happening. Because I was going into the movie thinking it's going to be all about her fractured psyche, like Black Swan or something. But ultimately,
or like an
opening night,
movie,
or like opening night in that way. Yeah, but no, it felt like no. There are people that are walking around doing these things to her, and the implication is that it's Naomi Merlant's character, or Merlant, however you say her name, that was in Portrait of a Lady on Fire. That it's implying it's her doing all that and planning to ruin her life all along the way of all these things that have happened. And also implying that early on, when there's the phone, when they're talking on the phone, that at first it is her and that girl that kills herself. Then it's implied later that when that's happening with the Russian girl, that it's her and the Merlant character that are doing that.
Yeah.
So it's like these kind of cycles that happen and that are interesting, I think, as far as that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot, but that's never explicitly mentioned.
The whole narrative is ultimately about someone who is very much in control, losing control over the course of the narrative in a whole host of ways. And I think it's interesting too. We saw a trailer for the Harvey Weinstein movie before this. That is about the New York Times story.
Another All the President's Men movie, basically.
But it's fascinating to see that, which is like this very like journalistic, this is what happened, let us tell you this story. I mean, it feels like a Wikipedia page come to life or a New York Times story come to life. And this is very much an artistic, literary version of that thing, and putting you in, in the perspective of the Weinstein figure themselves.
Right.
And not that these people need some extra level of empathy, I'm not saying, but that we are kind of getting a glimpse into the psyches of such people, and that for most of their lives they live their lives with such propriety where they never think there's going to be consequences come their way, and then wait a minute, there are consequences coming their way. Another thing too, one note to maybe close this on, is the extent to which Lydia Tarr feels, quote, guilt for Krista, whoever the girl was who committed suicide. That I feel like early on there is this genuine sense of guilt, or she feels about it, but then it very quickly she buries any sense of guilt that's there, and it becomes purely about survival mode and about gotta make sure all the emails are deleted, and that her career remains intact. And so again, I think it's a very fascinating movie. I mean, it's a long movie. It's 2.5 hours, but not a moment of it drags to me. Every moment of it feels pregnant with meaning, which is, again, I think ultimately that's what a, quote, literary movie is to me, is something that is, quote, every moment's pregnant with meaning, and that there's a lot of scenes that seem casual and random, but in the sum total of it at all, every single bit of it was intended. So I'd recommend seeing it whenever you get the chance to. Oh, another thing we didn't say too is like I heard Alec Baldwin's voice at one point.
Yeah, because that was never like officially. I kind of forgot about that too. Yeah, that it was like never officially. He was never even shown, but yeah, that he was in the movie.
But I was like, wait, is that Alec Baldwin? And then you forget about it. Also, we're looking at the Tar Wikipedia page. There's even moments of editing Lydia Tarr's Wikipedia page in the movie too. Yeah. So check it out if you get the chance. Again, we saw it at the AMC in Hickory. I don't know how long it's going to be there. There's honestly part of me that wants to go see it again, but I doubt that's going to happen. But check it out though. I mean, so again, it's a shame that Field hasn't been able to make as many movies as fans would have liked. But this feels like a movie that, again, as you said, is, I feel like, a reflection of his own frustrations with the lack of the amount of movies he's been able to make. But we're going to take a brief break, and you're going to hear the trailer here for one of our 2 movies of the day from 1984, Stranger Than Paradise.
I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Stop the things you do.
You sure you don't want TV dinner?
Yes, I'm not hungry. Why is it called TV dinner?
You're supposed to eat it while you watch TV. Television.
I know what a TV is. Where does that meat come from?
What do you mean?
What does that meat come from?
I guess it comes from a cow.
From a cow? It doesn't even look like meat.
Ava, stop bugging me, will you? You know, this is where we eat in America. I got my meat, I got my potatoes, I got my vegetables, I got my dessert, and I don't even have to wash the dishes.
I don't want you to take her away. Te egy gazember vagy. Te egy gazember vagy. Ne vidd el őket. Nekem szüksége van őre. Ő csinálja nekem a konyhamunkát. Ne vidd el őket. Hadd vidd őket, mert én akarom őket. Ne vidd el, te gazember, te szélhámos, te. Good for nothing. Hadd itt azt az asszont. Ne vidd el a nészemet. You son of a bitch.
I don't care if you don't want me, I'm yours right now. I'll put a spell on you. Because you're mine, mine, mine. Oh, you're mine.
I put a spell on you.
We gotta start. We gotta start. We gotta start now by me just saying how much I hate that song.
So John Lurie's character himself talks about hating the song. I don't.
Yeah.
I've wondered. I doubt
I'm
that's
sure
true
doesn't,
because he
no.
probably likes it.
Yeah.
So Stranger Than
Stop
Paradise.
the things you do. Like, stop. You know how long that song is, by the way? It's like 10 minutes long.
It feels
something.
like it.
Yeah, it's awful.
I don't hate it, by the way.
Yeah.
I like it in the context in which it's used
Well,
in this.
the single version's only like 2 minutes, 25 seconds, but I think there's versions of it that are like way longer. But, yeah. I don't know.
So, Stranger in Paradise from 1984. This is the very first Jim Jarmusch movie we've done on here. Levi, tell us what this movie's about.
So, Stranger Than Paradise is a 1984 American black and white absurdist deadpan comedy film. Co-written, directed, and co-edited by Jim Jarmusch, starring jazz musician John Lurie, former Sonic Youth drummer turned actor Richard Edson, and Hungarian-born actress and violinist Esther Balint. So funny, each of them are musicians. It features a minimalist plot in which the main character, Willie, is visited by Eva, his cousin from Hungary. Eva stays with him for 10 days before going to Cleveland. Willie and his friend Eddie go to Cleveland to visit her, and the three take a trip to Florida. It says, of course, the film is shot entirely in single long takes with no standard coverage.
So there you go. I'll try to find it. I've heard this over the years. There is a description that Jim Jarmusch gave once for what this quote movie is about, or what the inspiration of it is.
Yeah.
I'm trying. There was one of the links that said this.
I think it was in the Critic Wire. I'm looking there now. Let's see.
I think it was in that. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Jim Jarmusch famously described as, quote, a neo-realistic black comedy in the style of an imaginary Eastern European director obsessed with Ozu and the Honeymooners. And I remember when I first read that after I'd seen this movie, I was, oh my God, that's exactly what this movie is. Kind because Jim Jarmusch in many ways is a reflection of someone equally obsessed with Ozu and the Honeymooners. Tokyo Story even gets referenced in this movie as one of the horses or they can bet on, basically. And he's like, and Edson's character is like, Tokyo Story, like, yeah, let's do that. Let's bet on that. Because it's called Tokyo Story, you know?
Female touch.
Yeah. So, this movie I saw a few years ago, and I said this at the end of the last podcast when we were previewing this, that it's been one of my favorite movies I've seen in recent years. And in recent years, I've really fallen in love with, we've talked about Wim Wenders in the past, but also Jim Jarmusch. That, again, the 80s as a film period, we've talked about this before at length, and we'll probably dip into it a little bit here now, is one that has been memorialized by, you know, like the Hughes movies or Amblin's films or the Ghostbusters or, you know, these very pop 80s movies. And I know some of those are good. I mean, E.T. the Extraterrestrials, one of the best films ever made, so far be it for me to say it wasn't. But there's a lot of that stuff that's just crap. That's just like, okay, so what? Okay, I mean, and it's many of the things you were saying earlier about the plastic, phony, garbage 80s. I mean, there's just so much that's just not good. But then you actually dip into the independent or foreign films of the 80s, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, there actually is more to this decade than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. Because I think, obviously, even the commercial pop cinema of the 70s and 90s on either direction of the 80s are superior. Yeah. To what, even though the 80s is such this beloved, nostalgic decade for a great many people. But again, you see what these independent films from the 80s were, which, as we know, and we've talked about at length, New Hollywood of the 70s, late 60s through the 70s, was this such pronounced moment of when the independent became mainstream, but then kind of faded back into the distance, that it feels as though what I like to, in my head, call the other 80s of the independent 80s of the time in America and abroad was not as really thematically and narratively united as the New Hollywood directors were. Right. But that in many ways is this persistent flame that continues to burn amidst all the garbage and kind of what has become mainstream cinema in the 80s. But that also a movie like this has spurned and was a huge inspiration to directors that would follow, like Spike Lee, like Kevin Smith, like Tarantino, like Steven Soderbergh. What about, for you, Stranger Than Paradise and Jim Jarmusch in general, do you find kind of appealing as an alternative to a lot of these other movies? What has been defined as the 80s movie?
Well, one thing I really like about is it reminds me a lot of the Wim Wenders movies, like I said, the photography of it. But I think it's just that nature of it as being just so rambling and open and just an honest depiction of the people. I don't know, and it's just a very quick movie. I mean, it moves very fast. It's a short movie, too. It's only 89 minutes. Actually, it was kind of co-produced by West Germany in some way. Probably through money of that. It kind of literally almost created this type of movie. And I mean, there have been versions of it before. There's a movie that Vincent Canby had mentioned I've always wanted to see, Last Night at the Alamo, which I know is very beloved. And so you'd seen some of these movies that were about these, like, basically the black and white 80s movie of these independent movies that were intentionally sly and about rambling. These, like, slice of life, real people. Down by Law is an even bigger version of that, I think. It was similar as far as fitting into those other types of movies. Also, that movie Border Radio, which we didn't really like, but was similar to this. But a lot of these movies that are very much about younger people in the 80s, but youngish kind of adults in the 80s that didn't really fit into any sort of the culture war
had no interest,
right?
And
just kind of wanted to do what they wanted to do, but weren't all that successful at doing so.
I think a key difference for me between Wenders and Jarmusch, who I both love, is that I feel like Wenders' movies start off on the surface in general of being about the hopelessness of the world and the lack or inability to find an answer. But by the end of those movies, the characters themselves and Wenders himself seems as though they find some sense of enlightenment or truth and are changed by that in this kind of positive way, or at the very least cathartic way. Because, I think of a movie like, Alice in the Cities, which is like, starts off as this kind of disillusioned photographer, doesn't know where he's going, and by the end of the movie has found this sense of purpose, even if it's in this loss of a relationship he's fostered, a non-romantic one, kind of this fatherly figure to this girl. I feel like Jarmusch's movies, especially early on, and I'm not talking about early on in the movie, but early on in his career, his movies are like, we're not really looking to find some sort of a purpose. We're just looking to either subsist or survive. Now, I feel like when you get into his later work with whether it's like, the vampire movie he did.
Only
Lovers Left Alive, or Patterson, I feel like those movies are this, not regret, but kind of this older man's yearning for, I wish I did find the answer, or I wish the answer was right in front of me. And I think a movie like Patterson is the ultimate summation of that arc, in the sense of the answer is everyday life, and the answer is finding the beauty of everyday life. But a movie like this, it's weird, it's interesting to follow up what we were talking about with Tar's ending with this, because I feel like this movie is about, like, in its end, in its final moments, and its final moment as a distillation of everything that came before. Did the movie all come down to feel like you were being told a long-winded joke, and then the punchline happened, and the punchline is about the fact that nothing ever really did happen?
Yeah. It feels like a Shaggy Dog story in its own way, but something that I thought was funny was in one of the reviews. I think it was the Empire magazine review, which are always the worst reviews we always read. Because Empire magazine's kind of just a joke. Fast
food film kind of thing.
But they wrote something about, and learned something about life in the process. Like hell they did.
No, I read that, and I was like, nobody learned anything.
No, that's the whole point of the movie, is that no one learned anything.
But they don't care either.
Right. They weren't looking to learn anything. So, that just totally missed the point of the movie.
I agree.
Because I was like, no, the whole point is, like, that by the end, they're all alone.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not all that different or all that affected by that.
But, we could just have another 1 year later title card, and then, we meet each other again.
The funniest thing in the movie is what we don't see is that he goes on the plane, and he's looking for her, and is like, hey, where's she at? Hey, and like almost getting in fights with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, that's the stuff we never see.
And there's part of me that wondered too, as I've seen this, like, did they even shoot that stuff?
Right.
And that they just decided not to? I don't think they did.
No, they didn't.
Because first, I think this is the biggest thing. They wouldn't have had the money or the funds or the resources to do it, because this movie was made over several years, and it was a struggle to get made, I know. But secondly, like, Jarmusch wouldn't even wanted to have wasted time shooting that scene, because, again, the whole joke is that final moment of Edson waiting by the car and then looks up and sees the plane going over. And
we're not even totally sure he's in there.
Right.
It's implied,
yeah,
but we never know that for a fact. That's what's so kind of funny about it, is like, if he would have waited a little while, he might would have came out, and he just left him there.
But he just totally left.
Right. Yeah.
So you got these three people who are together, are now totally in different places. There's this question of, will they see each other again, or do they even care about seeing each other again?
But strangely, what's funny is they all have money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, assuming that Edson and Lurie both split the money up. Mm-hmm. They all have money to get where they want to go. So almost it's a hopeful ending in its own way of saying, now they all have the ability to do what they want to do apart from each other, because they've all got money through these weird circumstances.
So this is ultimately, this takes me to the question of this movie. And this is also, this could be applied to the question of Jarmusch's whole career output, but I think specifically this movie. It's been described again often as a black comedy or as a dark comedy or a comedy or whatever, and I think it is ultimately. But I find this movie to be very subtly and mutedly sad. Now, this might reveal more about my own philosophies and religious or spiritual ideas, I presume. But are these people happy? What is their MO? What is their life, any of these people?
I think Eddie's pretty happy.
Eddie seems happy.
From the very beginning of the movie, he walks in.
He's just happy to be anywhere.
And he was like looking at her like, no, she looks kind of cute. Like, look at that. Like, and he literally does that the whole movie, basically. Like, my favorite moment in the movie is that part at the end where they like see the note that she left and they've got all the money. And Lurie's like getting some stuff together, and he's like, "Get your stuff or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, I'm ready to go."
Yeah,
it's just kind of like that's just his whole attitude. Is just like I'll go wherever, do whatever. Obviously, Lurie's character. And we haven't actually talked about the actors much yet, but mainly because I feel like there's so few of them. We'll kind of talk about them as we go. But with Lurie's character Willie, I feel like he's the saddest character in the movie.
Yeah.
Because he's somebody that moved to America about a decade before this and tried to just totally forget everything about Hungary. He just didn't want to go back, didn't want to be around his family. He knew he had this aunt in Cleveland, but he lives in New York. And he's like, oh, I eat TV dinners and watch Forbidden Planet and football and smoke cigarettes. And that's it. And yeah, I guess I've got a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
And so in that way, I feel like he's and I feel like that's a good reflection of John. You know a lot more about John Lurie and are more of a John Lurie fan than I am. I feel like that's very much a reflection of his whole philosophy in general.
Well, this is a good chance, too, to talk about John Lurie in relation to Jim Jarmusch, because it's a fraught relationship, to say the least. John Lurie wrote a really good book last year. I forgot the name of it, but it was his kind of memoir called The History of Bones, which is about his life and his a lot about his musical career and also his interest in being more known as a musician, but that these collaborations he had in the 80s, especially with Jim Jarmusch, who he knew in the 70s and 80s, that he kind of started to resent being known as an actor, and that Jarmusch and Vinder's friendship even got him the part he had in Paris, Texas, which is very, very small and minimal. But that kind of he became known as kind of this big indie cult figure in the 80s, in large part due to that, when he really wanted to be more known as a musician within the Lounge Lizards, who's, again, I was not really familiar with them at all before I got into the work of Jarmusch and found, oh, this guy John Lurie, he's in this band Lounge Lizards, and that's really a band I love a lot now and really love their music, but all comes from John Lurie. But Lurie himself in his book talks a lot about that he helped co-conceive this movie, that he was a big active role and part of this movie, and to a lesser extent Down by Law, which he was in the next movie, which that has, of course, one of the all-time greatest film trios in Lurie, Tom Waits, of course,
and that's my
also
personal
Roberto
favorite
Benigni
of his movies.
And I think that's a more well-made and refined movie than this. But I slightly prefer this. But I love them both. And I really feel as though, and I say this as a pretty big Jim Jarmusch fan, I feel as though Jim Jarmusch's movies have not really overall had the wit and kind of the specific casual intensity that they had that he did with the period that he was working with Lurie. And that goes even to Mystery Train, which Lurie's involvement with was lesser than it was with certainly this and even Down by Law. But they have a very strained relationship, and he talks about a lot in his book that he feels as though he's been pushed aside over the years, and that he had some pretty serious health problems, and that Jarmusch was not there.
Cancer, and then he's had Lyme's disease for a long time.
Jarmusch never seemed all that interested in helping him out or knowing him during those periods, which as a Jarmusch fan I was disappointed to read.
Yeah.
But it's a really good book, and it got all kinds of really great anecdotes and stories that if you're interested in this scene at all or these creatives, I would recommend reading at some point. But this feels Willie is not the most demanding role for Lurie, but in many ways it's a great one for him to take on because it is kind of this he's somebody who is on a professional level actually fairly ambitious in a lot of the things he wanted to do, but I think what's interesting about him playing this role is that it acts as a good avatar for him and his politics and his beliefs and his worldview, which is stay the hell away from me, let me be who I want to be.
Right.
And his kind of being put upon by his cousin being there, and that he's almost embarrassed by her, but then when he realizes that she's capable of thievery like he is, that he's, oh, yeah, you're all right. You can hang around for a little while. And almost this annoyance that he has to entertain or put up with her because all he wants to do is sit around, smoke, watch TV, eat TV dinners, go gamble. And I don't know if he's exactly happy with that, but he's certainly content enough. But I feel as though this younger relative coming to be around him almost makes him at the least bit, and this is not once said out loud, but I feel like is in the narrative of these characters, he feels a sense of guilt and or lack of contentment by her presence there, because it is making him aware by her presence as a younger person there from where he's from of what he once was and now what he is, and I feel like not one word of that is said out loud, but I think that's what's fascinating about Jarmusch's style is that it gives enough of those ingredients there for you to acknowledge and reckon with, As far as from Eva's perspective, she's coming to America. I think she has these big expectations of what America's going to be, and then this reality that, America's just sitting in front of the TV, eating TV dinners, smoking cigarettes, waiting for the world and life to pass you by, and then that realization of like, well, this might not be great. I'm going to go try Frozen Cleveland out, and it turns out that's not all that great. And then, very famous line, switching gears ever so slightly, Richard Edson says in the movie, probably the most iconic lines in the movie is, you wherever you go, you're in the same place, basically. And Lurie just kind of immediately pushing that side and said, yeah, no kidding, Eddie, and just whatever, and doesn't even care about that. But those lines, I think, really ring true for what Jarmusch's vision of America is in this movie, whether it be from immigrants or from people who have been here for a while or people who have been lifelong native-born Americans, is this sense of this certain flattening of American culture that had been happening in the 80s and had certainly been going on before that. And again, Jarmusch has never been explicitly a political filmmaker, but there are political statements ever so subtly in his movies. I feel like the zombie movie he made a few years ago,
Dead Don't Die,
that has the most explicitly political movie he's probably made.
Almost lazily.
But is,
that has one of the all-time great endings to a movie of like, what a effed up world.
Yeah.
I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean,
but I really just, again, I think a lot about, I feel like this is, like I said, a sad movie in the sense of these characters not really going anywhere with their lives. But yet again, like, do they want to go anywhere? Do they have any ambition to go anywhere? Should they want to go anywhere, right? And again, being a relatively simple story and narrative, but there's this sense of, for what's it for?
Right.
And again, all these years later, nearly 40 years removed from this does not fit in very squarely with the vision of and the history of what the quote 80s was, unless you're looking at it in a more critical way or critical standpoint.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's something that everybody talks about. It's almost so just obvious to bring up, but I really do love that line of, it's kind of funny. You're someplace new, and everything looks just the same. And also the way he says it in his voice, I think, is just so funny. But it's funny, but it's also just one of the most honest and sad things I've ever heard anybody say, is just like, because that's around the time where they go to see Lake Erie, and it's just like,
and they go and they look, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like this movie wouldn't have played this point home in particular if it wouldn't have been in black and white. And I think, that adds a flattening in a way of the world that we're seeing, And then we do get different landscapes. We get what New York looks like, we get what Cleveland looks like, and then we get what Florida looks like. But nevertheless, there is this visual flattening that happens. And they literally, there's a scene where they go and look at the beach, and the waves are coming and going, but it's just like, okay, we came to Florida.
Yeah, because they were like, oh, I want to go somewhere hot. And then it's like, okay, well, it's as miserable as it is there as it is being cold. I mean, so, yeah, I think that's all, like I said, a very kind of subtle, obviously political statement of, like, about how, everything's so comfortable, but who cares,
Right.
I guess when you talk about Esther Ballent a little bit as Eva, I think she, of course, was later also in The Dead Don't Die as well. I'm looking to see if she was in much else. She's a musician. One of my favorite titles, The Linguini Incident, she was also in.
I mean, it is interesting that
she was in that movie Shadows and Fog, which I haven't seen.
Yeah, the Woody Allen movie.
Trees Lounge, the Buscemi movie, I always want to see.
Buscemi, of course, worked with Jarmusch too. It's interesting that he chose 3 musicians to be in this too, because a lot's been written about Jarmusch's either use of music, and this movie uses music pretty interestingly. Again, I Put a Spell on You, but then also Lurie's own score, which he contributed to. So I just think it's interesting that he put 3 musicians kind of in the in that,
Right. Says that she also worked with Biscott,
who was had a very intriguing relationship with Lurie himself, I know too, because they were friends and enemies in some ways, and again, the book goes in depth and detail on that. But he was a huge artist of the '80s, and to the point now, and this speaks to how the '80s has been garbagified, the good parts of it, even. His artwork has even started to appear. I've seen kids at school wear hoodies and stuff with his artwork, and I'm like, I remember this was a year or so ago, I saw a kid who had a hoodie on a Biscott art on it, and I was like, oh, like, are you a fan of his work or whatever? I've seen some of it myself, and they're like, who's that? And they don't even know who it is. It's like a lot of kids now wearing Nirvana shirts, and it's like, do you even know what this is, or is it just a fashion statement for you? A lot of kids you see wearing like Rolling Stone shirts too, different, obviously more mainstream, but again, that's what happens with any cultural artifact. After a certain point, it gets appropriated and becomes more of a fashion statement than a genuine work of art in its own right. But
and then of course there's Richard Edson as Eddie, who I always loved seeing in literally anything.
He was famously in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Right. He took the car for a spin.
What kind of place do you think this is? Of course, I also know him in his own way. He was barely in Sonic Youth at the beginning, which is my favorite band. Was in Sonic Youth towards the very beginning of their career. They famously had like a bunch of drummers early on, and then settled on Steve Shelley. Well, settled as in, I mean, he's a great drummer, but he was one of my favorite things in 3 from Hell, which came out just a few years ago. But he's been in a lot of different things. Of course, probably his best performance overall, I think, is in Do the Right Thing. I think he's really
great in that.
I think that's kind of a role that he really gets a lot to do, and
I feel like, I mean, he's good in this, but I feel like it's like, oh, hey, this guy, throw him in there, and he does make a great foil for Lurie's, quiet, simmering anger, But I think he grew as an actor even between that and this and Do the Right Thing, who is in that. But
he was also in Black Dynamite. I forgot. It's Dino, it says. want to wear that. A movie called Columbus Day with Val Kilmer. You look at that.
Yeah.
Like, Starsky and Hutch. Female touch. But yeah. Yeah, and they're kind of the main people. There's a bunch of other people that are just kind of in the movie. Rocket's Red Glare, famously.
There's some great stories about Rocket's Red Glare in the Lurie book, by the way. He was an insane individual, to say the very least.
So what else are we...
Well, I feel like I hinted on what this movie's saying in a roundabout way earlier. Just the idea that, again, like, you kind of want to feel sad and sorry for these characters, but then again, part of the grim joke of the movie is they don't seem to be all that broken up about, at least not out loud. So, I think it's that sense of irony was something that was new for American independent film at that particular moment, and that's why Jarmusch's work has been so influential. As I've said, I know a lot of younger directors like Steven Soderbergh and Spike Lee especially were very inspired by him and have, said at various times that, oh, wow, his career kind of gave me hope that there's something. Because, again, you think about what independent film was. I mean, a lot of those new Hollywood people had either faded away or were... somebody like Scorsese, I mean, I say this as a huge fan of The Color of Money, but it's like, he was at a point where he was going to maybe do a sequel to, say, The Hustler. You know what I mean? I mean, they had either leveled up or were passed away or not making movies by that point. And so American film cinema needed, like, this shot in the arm independently that Jarmusch came along and offered up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I it's just, I think it was inspiring to a lot of people to make a movie that was so bare, but so funny and so developed in these more subtle ways.
And I mean, this movie even sets the standard and the prototype of what a quote Sundance movie is having these quirky characters. You put them on the road, and they get into and hijinks ensue, and just a sense of humor. I mean, this really has set a standard for established a prototype that a lot of movies have followed ever since. And again, I'm in general, just as I've said already, a huge fan of Jarmusch. I love Down by Law a lot as well, which was his next film after this. Permanent Vacation, which is a movie, basically his student film he made before this.
This gun is my my legislative gun.
Yeah,
I haven't even seen that movie, but you showed me that part.
That movie's actually on the Criterion for this, but. I know you're a big fan of Dead Man, I think, as well. And that's a movie I like quite a bit.
Mystery Train, I like a lot.
Patterson, I really love.
I really, really loved Mystery Train the first time I saw it, but I haven't seen it in so long that overall that might technically be my favorite of his, but I'd need to see it again. But Down by Law I really love, though, because it kind of has all the folks you want in it as far as Lurie, Tom Waits and Roberto Benigni, and just those three is a weird combination. Is great. It's kind of like a different version of this, but they're even less connected, obviously.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that we're going to see this with Dumb and Dumber. That has more of, as we said last time, a MacGuffin of like, oh, we got to do this thing. This is just like, oh, we don't got nothing going on. The MacGuffin is almost a reverse thing. It's like, oh, we got some money. How are we going to spend the money?
Right.
And it's just like, where are we going to go to spend the money? Oh, well, we're in the black now. Let's go show it off to Eva, and it's just like show her like what all we've got now, and it's like, all right, well, let's go to Florida, and like how much? And it's always like, how much money do we got? Like. In a roundabout way, as an audience, that's like there's like a ticking clock or time bomb to that of like, when are we going to run out of it, or what circumstances are going to cause us to run out of it. There's no like sense of let's start a family, let's start a home, let's just like invest it wisely or any of that kind of other crap. It's just like, what do we need to like get by for now, and then when that's out,
it reminds me a lot of the Cormac McCarthy novel Suttree, in the sense that it's just about people that are just like living day to day, literally. And it's
there's people that are
some
like
money right now, but I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Temperamentally, as far as our lifestyles, we live pretty conservatively in terms of knowing we need a budget and we got to have these things. And so that's one thing I also just like about the genre of road movies, as far as the catharsis of them, is just put everything in the car and go. Yeah. And again, I don't really want to, frankly, do that in my life, but like just the fantasy of the what if, and these movies.
Well, that's a very
itch,
Antonioni idea. I mean, that got its way into Mad Men, obviously, as being part of that too, and so those are ideas that are kind of eternal. I mean, On the Road, of course, that's a very beat idea.
We didn't really mention Antonioni, but that inevitably has some sort of a influence on something like this too. European directors.
Yeah, and Paul Thomas Anderson movies too, kind of like, especially with The Master. I feel like it's a version of that. But yeah, I think that was just such an infectious idea, particularly with this movie, that you had seen that a little bit with Vendors movies. But like you kind of said with Vendors movies, it always ends up with you have something that you bring back with you, like usually in the form of a person, or a connection is made. That's not. This one's literally about the lack of connection or the lack of communication by the end of it. And that, I think, is just such a funny, but also to everyone sort of alluring idea of I'm just going to get lost. Like,
yeah, let's get lost, as the song says.
I mean, as David Lynch once said, Chet Baker, he did get lost. He was very worst kind.
But I think also it's just it's a statement on what the kind of underground cool hipsterism of the 80s was as a movie like this, in terms of it's all kind of all lost and wasted, but who cares anyways, man?
Right.
But like in a way that's not quite as dark, as cynical as that might sound, but nonetheless that's where they were.
Right.
So that's Stranger Than Paradise. We're going to take a break, and up next you're going to hear the trailer for our next movie, Dumb and Dumber.
What are we gonna do?
I got an idea.
Go faster!
Dumb, a person lacking mental power.
What's her last name? I'll look it up. Starts with an S. Slappy. No. Swappy. Maybe it's on the briefcase. Look on the... Oh, yeah! It's right here. Samsonite. I was way off.
Idiot, an adult mentally inferior to a child of 3.
Skis, huh?
That's right.
The yours?
Uh-huh.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Cool.
Stupid, a person below normal intelligence.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
If they each had half a brain, they'd still only have half a brain.
Oh, look, Frost. Hold on.
Jim Carrey,
Hold that plane!
Sir, you can't go in there. It's okay. I'm the limo driver.
Jeff Daniels,
Oh, geez, look at the butt on that. Yeah. He must work out.
Dumb and Dumber. For these guys, every day is a no-brainer.
And welcome back, Idiot. As the trailer says. I've always had a huge affinity for that trailer because it used to be on the Mask VHS, and I grew up watching that a lot. That's a movie, by the way, we might have mentioned this a while back. It doesn't hold up all that well, as it turns out.
No, which was interesting because I read the Roger Ebert review of Dumb and Dumber, and he was talking about how much he preferred that to this, which I think is just so laughable.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't get that.
We can jump ahead a little bit with this, but a lot of the reviews for this movie were like, I mean, if you're prepared to put up with some pretty stupid, dumb things, then it's better than you might think it is. Like over and over again,
well, it's
almost
like
apologizing
and this
for
is,
liking
you
it
can
anyway.
tell this story better than me, but it's kind of like you always told me about two friends of yours that were big fans of this movie. Also, said they saw the trailer. You went to the movies with them, something else, and they saw a trailer for this. And they were like, the Dumb and Dumber 2, T.O.
Yeah.
And we're like, and you've seen that movie. I've heard it's awful.
It's not good.
But they were like, it just looks so dumb. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of always been that way. Like,
well, I think that's a difficult question to say because there are plenty of like comedies I could see myself thinking are really dumb or stupid, and I know they're not good, but I find myself apologizing for laughing at it. This is a movie to me that there's no apologies necessary. It's a really funny, pretty great comedy. It's honestly, maybe actually, my favorite comedy.
Yeah.
Because I really, really love like some other 90s comedies, like probably way up there for me also would be The Big Lebowski, but there's such a cult and the fandom behind The Big Lebowski that becomes so kind of pretentious and labored after a point.
And that is a comedy movie, but it being by the Coen brothers, it has a certain cachet to it that is very highbrow.
Speaking of directing brothers, the Farrellys. Now, Peter Farrelly was the only credited director for this one, but they clearly had a relationship, and they made several movies together. Now, I believe Peter Farrelly's kind of off doing his own thing with Green Book and whatnot. I'm not sure.
And that, the greatest beer run ever.
That's right. He did do that, too, which is it's crazy that, you can now say, I guess, Academy Award winner Peter Farrelly, and of course it's for Green Book. Of course it couldn't be for this, or there's something about Mary that, the really great things he did that, could win an Oscar for. Yeah. But here we are, Dumb and Dumber. As we've said, and we'll try not to make this just a quote fest, because we can just go through a whole rundown of this whole movie and all the ways it makes us laugh. This is honestly, too, I mean, I grew up watching this a decent amount in the 90s, not as much as The Mask, but I called it on TV a bunch of times, too, and it's just one of those movies that already within... And you can even look at the poster here. It's clearly parodying Forrest Gump, which came out earlier that year in 94. And also, this was a Christmas movie in 94, which is a dimension that I don't usually think
Lloyd
about
Christmas.
or know. Lloyd Christmas himself. It wasn't Harry Thanksgiving, his buddy, but...
Right. Harry Dunn.
Harry Dunn. He's done.
Harry Dunn.
So, Levi, tell us a little bit about what Dumb and Dumber is ostensibly about.
Dumb and Dumber is a 1994 American buddy comedy film directed by Peter Farrelly and who co-wrote the screenplay with Bobby Farrelly and Bennett Yellen. It's the first installment in the Dumb and Dumber franchise.
Which is actually a thing.
Right, because there's the prequel.
Dumb and Dumber When Harry Met Lloyd.
Right.
And then there's the animated series, which I don't even know what we want to say about that.
That
was a random time, too, in the late 80s, early 90s, where these random animated series made out of stuff like... Beetlejuice was probably the one that kind of stuck around the longest, but then even The Mask had an animated series, and then this. And then, of course, Dumb and Dumber 2, the movie that came out about 10 years ago now-ish, a little less.
But it stars Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels, and by the way, there are some things in this summary that I'm going to poke holes in a little bit that I don't know if I believe, but it tells the story of Lloyd Christmas and Harry Dunn, two dumb but well-meaning friends from Providence, Rhode Island, who set out on a cross-country trip to Aspen, Colorado to return a briefcase full of money to its owner, thinking it was abandoned as a mistake that was actually left as a ransom. Lauren Holly, Karen Duffy, Mike Starr, Charles Rocket, and Charlie Rocket, would you? Mm-hmm. And Terry Garr play supporting roles. I don't know that they are well-meaning, especially not Lloyd, because I think that Harry is, actually. And actually, as dumb as Harry is actually somewhat, definitely the smarter one of the two.
Did you notice one of the reviews said that he was the dumber one?
No,
I think it said that. One of the reviews said that. I don't remember,
okay.
and I was like, no, clearly Lloyd, I think he is.
He's
but,
so much dumber.
This would get into talking a little bit about the cuts of this movie, too, because I think this actually makes a little bit of a difference. Is primarily, I've seen the television cut, even though I've seen the Blu-ray now so many times. But
I prefer the edited version. Personally.
Yeah, well, I think almost now with home video, I'm not totally sure about this, but I feel like almost now with home video that the unrated is now like the canonical version or edition.
And I'm like, no.
And the biggest things, of course, there are some like visual aspects and elements that are certainly maybe push it more into the unrated category. But there are these little asides or certain scenes that go on a little longer in the unrated cut of like specifically Lloyd being mean to Harry. You notice that, or it's like some things in the hotel when there is just them in that like heart shaped hot tub,
literally
and
everything that is cut out.
There's a reason.
No,
for
yeah.
It.
Like even that moment. There's a moment real quickly. I know we're kind of going off track here, but there's that moment where Mike Starr kills the bird.
Yes,
and it cuts back to him doing more of that. I always felt like that was a really great transition.
Yeah.
from him like, come here, to like then them outside the building. I always thought that was really great, and then that's just ruined by that version of it, and it's just
which
like,
speaks to
you know,
there are a lot of reasons why that, you know,
these things happen.
are cut.
And it's like what Martin Scorsese's always said. He doesn't have director's cuts of his movies because he's like, it doesn't really matter. Movies are eventually that's what was meant to happen ultimately.
I think I think that something like Wolf of Wall Street originally had a 4 to 5 hour cut, but he always knew from the beginning that was just the was the big block of granite. He knew that like, well, we're going to cut things out of it, so that's the movie is ultimately that.
Right. But anyway, all that's just to say that the movie's ultimately, like I said, about these two idiots that. But part of the thing, though, I think, is the lecherousness of Lloyd is so clear to where he's clearly not well-meaning exactly. That's what I think is actually so interesting about his character, is that it seems like a very basic, like, I'm in love with this woman, but it's like, it goes beyond stupidity into another level of just, like, obsession.
Or intentional, sabotage he does, even with Harry, who I think he does care about and love.
Yeah.
But this is the first time that he's, in the world that we've seen of this, like, has a feeling or a relationship beyond his friendship with Harry. You know what I mean?
Right.
With
and
Mary.
So all that's just to say that well-meaning. I don't think so. But
I mean is that this unrated cut, I feel like, actually makes that even more false.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm just giggling just thinking about everything in this movie, but
and I think one of the brilliant things about this movie is the simplicity of the plot.
Yeah,
I mean, is that it has this MacGuffin quality to it, but that ultimately it's like, okay, we're off to the races, we're off and running. You pretty quickly, I think the first act does a great job of establishing who these characters are, setting them on a mission, getting them out there, and I think this is the first movie that they really made. The Farrellys,
yes,
and I think it's very impressive that they already have a pretty clear understanding of how to drive the plot forward.
Right. And it's a movie that we talked about this, I think, a little bit last week. It has a lot of different locations, and it's weird because, like, obviously, and that's natural at being a road movie, but you have obviously Providence at the beginning of the movie.
Which the more you watch this movie and the closer you pay attention, as you're like, what the hell is going on in this? In this world and city,
specifically, and they're homeless men pissing against walls, and
then even when they're coming back after their horrible days at work and they're walking in, like, you're paying attention to all the stuff going on, and you're like, what is all this?
Right.
Like, this is crazy.
And hey, watch it, that guy. All the different people that like, and Mrs. Nougaborn, whatever the hell all that is.
Yeah.
And of course the guy that is at the gate at the airport that's like smiling as he's taking down the name. It's just like, what is up with that guy?
Yeah.
And that he like knows what's going to happen to him, and he's like, well, I'm just going to let it happen. Like,
right.
But yeah.
Fell off the jetway again, as Lloyd says later. So I guess he's just, we expect.
You know what really chaffed my eye though? I mean, like I said, we're just going to be quoting the whole time. Do you want to go through the cast first before we really get into the rest? Okay, so Jim Carrey is Lloyd Christmas, a goofy chip-toothed slacker who has been fired from several jobs. He has a crush on Mary Swanson, unaware that she is already married. That's actually not something that is officially revealed in the movie until the very end, although it's kind of implied because of the kidnapping.
Yeah.
But that's never even explicitly said in the scenes with Charlie Rocket and Terry Garr and that other random guy. I don't even know what his name is. Joe Baker, maybe? I don't know. Not Joe Don.
Yeah.
But that whole, they kind of imply, like, Mary, you, blah, 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 that it is her husband, but that's never officially actually, like, certain until the very end. But yeah, it's also funny, like, and this goes into all the detail of the movie because a lot of people compared this to Airplane, but I don't think there's as many sight gags as there are just like gags in the movie.
Yeah.
But one random detail that is just so funny in the movie is his chipped tooth, obviously,
right.
which in Dumber and Dumberer, When Harry Met Lloyd is explained or whatever, and it's just like,
which is
wow,
something that Jim Carrey
like,
actually had and that had normally had covered up.
I always forget that, and right? And they were like, "Oh, let's just do that because it's funny." Yeah.
What I don't know if we've really talked about Jim Carrey much on here before. I got a feeling we have.
I think we have. Point. I'm going to assume we have and keep it brief.
Yeah,
but
I mean, and clearly one of the comedic minds of great comedic minds of his generation. I would really recommend if you haven't seen the documentary about the making of Man on the Moon,
Jim and Andy, the Great Beyond.
Yeah, which I love that documentary more so even the Man on the Moon, which I also like. But he clearly had just such a meteoric rise to fame pretty quickly, even though he had been in things before in the 90s. And I think if you look at his 94 was in particular his highlight year because he had this at the end of the year, but then even before that. He had Ace Ventura. He had The Mask. I mean, I think you can pretty clearly look at those three roles and performances, and they all mean something a little different. But this is the best character he actually got to play out of those three because, I mean, the other two are so exaggerated. Now, in The Mask, he does have the go-between between Stanley Ipkiss and The Mask, and there is some difference there.
Right.
But as far as, like, again, what we were saying earlier, that he gets to be really funny and goofy and stupid, but then had this kind of vindictive streak to him and, that cold-heartedness to him. I think that's, something that he doesn't get enough credit for in this movie, I think.
Yeah.
But out of those three is the best performance.
I mean, he's really not that far from just being the Riddler a year later, as far as that kind of, like, evilness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a lot more subdued, and it's kind of cloaked in this, like, just stupidity.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like I said, I think about that every time I watch the movie, just what a totally evil individual he is, and that ultimately, that Harry just kind of follows him along with whatever. And it's strange because ultimately that makes the movie, when you really think about it, feel kind of uneven and a little weird, but I actually respect that about the movie more is that and they get equal screen time, I feel like, too. I don't think it's anything like that, but exactly. But it does feel like Lloyd is more of, like, the main character, even though that...
Well, he's the one who has the initial connection to Mary, obviously, and spurs... to Mary, and then spurs Harry into getting involved in it. I mean, even the fact that Harry and Mary are the other two implies that he has a choice to make in some regard as far as who's more important to him. And when the going gets tough, when Charles Rocket has the gun pointed at you in the hotel room,
kill him.
I mean, that's kind of meant more as a joke, I think. But like, he actually feels genuine.
Wait, can I have a vegetarian meal?
But like, he feels. I mean. I don't want to overemphasize Lloyd as an evil. I think he's complicated, which makes him more interesting than just being evil exactly. But I mean, I think him and Harry do have its own, and a lot of bro comedies or bromances have this. Again, that you feel more invested in that than you do a romance exactly in the movie. But this would be a chance for us to just talk a little bit about Jim Carrey as Fire Marshal Bill.
Yeah.
And
let me show you something.
Let me show you something. It was just hilarious. But I mean,
and him on In Living Color, just in general.
And I've said versions of this about Steve Carell before. I know to you, but I kind of just wish when Jim Carrey was really just willing to be funny and real. And I think he resents that. I think in a lot of ways he's just like, I don't want to be the clown all the time. I want to be able to do what I want to do.
Especially that he went through such a hard time in the late 90s, particularly around the time of Man on the Moon, even before that Truman Show, and then after that, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless
Which is
Mind.
a great movie, I think.
I think he's just gone through so much internal trauma that I understand that he would want to admit, especially after what happened to Robin Williams and all these other, comics that this has happened, these things have happened to.
Yeah.
That I understand why he would feel that way to do that. But then now what he does, and this is a light criticism of him, I love Jim Carrey. I really think he is truly.
And we didn't really mention Liar Liar. That movie's also hilarious. He's in the 90s a little later than this.
But that now it's like, well, even when he was doing something like Kick-Ass 2, it was like, okay, that's like some... but now he's doing like Sonic.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Which I'm sorry, I'm not going to watch.
Right, and
I
like,
feel bad because I'm like, Jim Carrey's trying and he's in something, but I'm not watching
right,
that.
But it's like, I feel like he's wanting to take himself seriously, but then he's doing crap like that, and it's kind of just like strange.
Maybe
he's just in a strange place in his whole career in general now anyway, because he's kind of wanting to be a painter too, and so...
He had a girlfriend he was very close to, too, who died of like a drug overdose, and there's been also allegations that he got her addicted to those, and so there's some more fraught things going on with that.
And so he's a very complicated individual, but I do... And I don't say that to say he doesn't have any more to give, because I feel like he would.
Yeah. Well, he might even... he's even said that he wants to like work... Like, he was asked a while back, like, who'd you want to work with? And he's like, well, not many names, but the Safdie brothers are people I'd love to work with. Can you imagine him in a Safdie movie? I mean, that would be...
Honestly, like, if they would have made... And I don't mean to speak too ill of Adam Sandler. Can you imagine him in Uncut Gems instead? It's like what that would be, maybe like a version of that. I don't know.
Well,
that would take away the whole Jewishness aspect of that movie, which I think is such a part of that character. So I think overall the right decision was made, but something like that.
Well, who knows? Like, I know that Adam Sandler is getting ready to be in the next Safdie Brothers movie, which is about the world of card collecting or whatever. And who knows? He could be like a antagonist.
Yeah.
Or can you imagine Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey even being in a movie together, which they have not.
Have you even seen this card? And he's really great in The Cable Guy too. I wanted to mention. So like that, and that's what I was going to say.
I mean, you look at a lot of the best comedies of the '90s. He's there. Yeah, in front and center. I mean, and even now, we're not as big of fans of Ace Ventura.
No,
but it undeniably has. Excuse me, I like to ask you a question. Like, it has moments in it that I do think about.
But I think that, that's what I was going to say. Is that, like what you said, is I think he has more that he can give and things he could do. But I do wish, I wish he just were doing what he were himself again of what he, because there's nobody funnier. Really,
when he's on, nobody's going to touch that. Yeah. And I think Robin Williams, we're not necessarily the biggest outright fans of Robin Williams.
Yeah.
But I think that Robin Williams was able to like blend comedy and drama like few people I've ever seen. I mean, a movie like The Fisher King is one of my favorite movies, and I think that is just such a performance and series of choices that I just think a lot of.
Yeah.
And he's just brilliant in that movie. And I think, as you said, ever since Robin Williams, not only his career, but his untimely and unfortunate passing, that maybe there's more awareness and fear now about some of these comedians and, the sad clown archetype or the funny man gone awry archetype that I wish nothing but the best for Jim Carrey, and hopefully, he can get back to doing more things. But again, it's like some people, and this isn't to say he needs to go away, but certain people just have a cultural time and place, and they'll always have that. Yeah. So you think of these 90s comedies he was in, he'll always have that era and moment that he was this untouchable superstar within that
and
realm
I mean,
of
particularly
movie.
Two of my favorite movies are this and Batman Forever, and
I think he makes a great Riddler.
He does. And that's just to say, like, he's not somebody I think a whole lot about anymore, just because he's not in as many things, and I just honestly haven't seen as many of his other movies, random stuff he's made. But just, I don't know where I'd be without those two movies, like, just as a fan of movies, like, two movies that aren't that well beloved either by, like, cinephile people.
You're talking about Dumb and Dumber and Batman Forever?
Right, that would be more like, I don't know about that, but obviously that's just to say that those are two movies that made me love watching movies, and so, and I love both of them still genuinely, like, and I think they're good, so I don't have any problem with saying that.
And again, I said it earlier, I really think a lot of Eternal Sunshine. And I think that was the best example of him doing something a little more dramatic, but yet nonetheless offbeat.
Yeah, because The Truman Show and
I like that movie fine enough, but I think it's slightly overrated.
That I think, and it's Peter Weir's made so many better movies than that too. It's amazing, but and also the Man on the Moon. Same thing with Milos Forman. He's made way better movies than that too.
Yeah, Amadeus,
So and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and so. Yeah, and even other stuff he's made that I haven't even seen that I know would be better, like Fireman's Ball and other stuff. But it just, to me, those movies just don't, or feel like kind of like him trying to do that already.
Yeah,
but weren't as good as things that came before or after. So Yeah, but I feel like this is really his big role to me. I feel
well,
like
again, I think it's the perfect role because it
Yeah.
allows him to be funny, but the character is also slightly more complicated than I think most people really understand it to be.
Right.
But, and it's weird to say this about someone who's the co-lead, I think the secret weapon of this movie is Jeff Daniels as Harry
and we've
Dunn.
talked about Jeff Daniels before when we talked about Gettysburg. We didn't do a podcast on that, but we talked
that would have
about
been one of our longer episodes.
Right, but and I love him in that too.
Yes.
I love him in everything. I mean, he's great, especially Something Wild, which
I
we're
think
big fans of,
he's in a class of his own in terms of like he's one of those actors or actresses that anything they're in, they are better because he is in it instantly.
That's why I've
He has
always
that,
wanted. I know
quality.
the Newsroom is kind of reviled
Yeah.
by a lot of people, but I've always had hope for that show just because he's in it. I'm like, it can't be all that bad because Jeff Daniels leads
And my
the
good
show.
friend,
Like,
co-worker Sean Miller actually
Yeah.
saw,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird
Yeah,
on
Tim's Atticus
stage,
Finch,
and he said he was amazing in that. And I know,
Yeah.
So
no, I mean,
he's
he
in
really is
Speed
truly
also
one of our-
around this
Oh, yeah,
time
of course,
period.
yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Let me even look at just a list here. There's a bunch of movies he's been in I haven't seen. Obviously, Purple Rose of Cairo.
Oh, great in that,
really
yeah.
great in that. Terms of Endearment, I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Something Wild we mentioned. I really love him in Something Wild in particular.
Yeah.
I think it's really great. Squid and the Whale.
Yeah.
He's pretty good in that. Well, that has that whole we laugh because we're thinking of this moment where he's in an argument, and then "Hey You" by Pink Floyd starts playing, and it's like him looking, and that music is just funny.
Yeah.
He was in Steve Jobs, of course.
He was in Looper also. I remember
Godless. I remember he was good on Godless. You know, obviously have we ever talked about that on
The
here?
Cookie Country
Yeah.
moment.
So like there was one we were watching Godless, and I remember I was sitting eating, which are by the way like random food talk here real quickly.
Yeah.
The best cookies that you can buy on the market are the Keebler soft batch chocolate chip cookies. Literally nothing even comes close. To the point where I'm like, why do we even make the hard cookie? I don't get it.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm a fan of the softer cookie
but anyway,
myself.
I was eating that while we were watching it. And he's like, this is Godless Country.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is Cookie Country. I don't remember how that got started, but then we said that literally the rest of the time we were watching it.
Yeah.
But yeah, then it talks about some theater he's been in. But yeah, this is a really random role for him, though. It's kind of against type because normally he has done some kind of lightly comedic roles like Purple Rose of Cairo.
Or Something Wild.
And like I said, even has done like action performances like Speed. But like normally he's more of a dramatic actor.
Even in Purple Rose of Cairo and Something Wild, those were both kind of like straight men / foil types, where it was like characters who didn't really understand the absurdity of the situations they're in.
Right.
This is more explicitly a comedic performance. And I know, too, and I mentioned this last week, he's told the story a bunch of times how grateful he is and how close he is with Jim Carrey because Jim Carrey actually fought for him to be cast in this because Jim Carrey said, I need someone who's a legitimate actor who can play that role and can act as a foil for me to act stupid and ridiculous, and he'd be a little bit of a foil, which, again, is not to say Harry is himself all that smart.
Yeah, because I think it was originally going to be like Nicolas Cage in that role, and I'm like,
that wouldn't have been right. Yeah.
No, that just doesn't make sense.
Now, Nicolas Cage in the Farrelly Brothers movie, I would like to see that, but not that wouldn't have made sense.
He could have been in Kingpin or something.
Yeah.
Like, take
the Bill Murray role in that, or Woody Harrelson. Yeah.
Yeah, either one. I don't know. Well, Bill Murray, I don't know these days.
We'll Bill Murray talk for another day.
Yeah, I don't know. As the late Leslie Jordan would have said, Peloton. Right, yeah. But R.I.P. Leslie Jordan, by the way. No, I think he's really great. It describes him as, Lloyd's ditzy and airheaded best friend and roommate. He has a crush on Mary, too, but is also unaware that Mary has a husband. Yeah, so towards the end of the movie, he has a crush on Mary.
Mm-hmm. What do we think of, like, the whole situation where he's told... Lloyd wants him to go talk to Mary about, and saying, oh, there's Lloyd over there, and he knows you... And then he gets, like, called into eventually this, like, date with Mary.
That Terry Garr's like, forget about your friend for one day. What are you saying?
Do we think that, like, that's, quote, a bad friend move from Harry to do, or that he's just caught in this...
He's so stupid.
He doesn't even totally understand what's going on?
He's literally so stupid.
Yeah.
And then I think he does realize that. But then we must remember that towards the end when he comes in, and obviously part of this is part of the plan about they know what's going on, but that he was going to be like, oh, we need to have a serious chat or whatever. Now part of that's all part of him going in there with the bulletproof vest on, and no, stay. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think it's partly that it's a bad friend move, but also he's just so stupid.
But it's not nearly as vindictive.
Well, by the way, they
shaded
literally
as...
came all the way across the country, which he thought was stupid in the first place to do.
Yeah, right.
He was like, no, Lloyd, no. I say we stay here, we hunt for jobs till we have enough money for the worm store.
That's one of the downtime moments of the movie, which is already early on. Another one of my favorites is where they walk different directions, and then within 30 seconds,
Harry,
he traded in the sheepdog for the moped.
What even is that? Yeah, moped, I guess.
Yeah.
Was like,
and then he's like,
I think that's one
it.
of the funniest random things in the movie is like how quickly that downtime is totally resolved, and it's just like, oh yeah, whatever. Like,
so we have at least 3 downtimes. We have a very early on one at the end of the first act. Then we have that, and then we have
post Red Right Hand. Oh, we're gonna get to the soundtrack later, by the way. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where he's just so stupid that he'll just go along with whatever, and then he finds himself in the situation, and is just like, no, I'm attracted to her too, and whatever, and so.
Well, I wonder how Jeff Daniels feels that when people are making acting reels of all his great roles and performances, and of course he has plenty of those, that one of those signature moments of his career will be him on the toilet. Like, what that must feel like as an actor.
By the way, I wanted to read what the Wikipedia summary says about that. It says, in retaliation, Lloyd pranks Harry by serving him a coffee laced with a potent dose of laxative, causing Harry to spontaneously defecate in a broken toilet at Mary's house. I love also is it defecate.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody talks about that scene. It's probably the most famous scene in the movie, ultimately, other than the mock. Yeah, ing, yeah, bird, yeah. But obviously, that's the most famous scene in the movie is him taking a crap.
Now, I've heard Jeff Daniels say before that Clint Eastwood found him at a party a year or two after this came out and said, that scene where you're on the toilet is the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Well, it says he was in that movie Blood Work randomly, so maybe that's how he got him that job off of that. Which is so random that to think that.
Yeah, he was doing some blood work.
He would have been like, right, If I ever told my Clint Eastwood story on here,
I think you might have. But go ahead and tell it again.
So a friend of mine. This is random because we're not technically talking about Clint Eastwood, but a friend of mine. Who I won't name just in case this would ever be a problem with this
story.
Unless
they signed an NDA.
Right, I don't know. Was working on, I think it was 1517 to Paris, I'm pretty sure. And there was some scene they were filming in a bar or something, and Clint Eastwood got on top of the bar so he could talk to everybody to direct the scene or whatever, and the ceiling or the top of the bar was too low and he didn't recognize that, and he hit his head. And this would be funnier if I were in person to show you what it looked like, but he went this like that and touched the top of his head, and said everybody was going in to help him, but my friend was hiding, trying not to laugh, that it was just so kind of funny, but random thing, but yeah, that just the hilarity of that it's just in the toilet thing, not the Clint Eastwood thing. Hopefully his brain still operates. I don't know. The doctor is about to operate, as the mask would say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that really is just one of the funniest things. But it's another level of acting that has to go into doing that. I mean, it's so funny, but I think. And there's that whole debate about comedian actor thing, where sometimes I do think of, oh no, and that's why somebody like Carey or Carell would say, no, I'm an actor now. Like, you know. But Daniels is in a weird position where he's given a comedic performance, but he is an actor. Like, he is an actor.
Yeah, primarily known as more
and
of a dramatic
so that's
actor.
what I think is so impressive and why that role works so well and why you said like he is a secret weapon is because all the effort you have to put into actually being funny, but also like all the facial expressions and like there's another level of acting that
which
has
I'm
to go
sure
into that,
somebody like
right?
him probably really reveled and loved in doing
Right.
a role like this
Yeah.
in terms of just like, you know, just to cut loose and be more fun, be the funny man in a lot of ways. We'll go through the rest of these actors a little more quick. Quicker.
You've had these
extra gloves this whole time. I'm gonna kill you. What? I'm gonna kill you.
I mean, my favorite line.
That's a low key downtime, but then they
My favorite line in the whole movie is, "I'm gonna throw this D curse right into that D pond." Lauren Holly is Mary Swanson. God bless this actress.
She was briefly married to Jim Carrey.
Troubled heiress whose husband Bobby has been kidnapped. I haven't really seen her in anything else.
She's
She was in a lot of TV.
Adventures of Ford Fairlane, I remember.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, as Linda Lee. Linda Lee.
Any Given Sunday.
The Chum Scrubber.
Okay.
What? Meet Generation RX. Wow.
Godfather of Green
Fatwa. Yeah, I mean, she hasn't been in a lot of stuff. Black Coat's Daughter, that was kind of a movie some years ago, I remember. The Cuban. Is that with...
Lee Gossett Jr.?
Lee Gossett Jr., yeah. Yeah, and then a bunch of just random TV stuff. But yeah, Fantasy Island, random. Yeah, just a bunch of TV. Let's see if there's anything more recently, hang on, that I might have seen. Nope. Okay.
No.
But yeah, I mean, she is in and out of the movie. Obviously, somebody who's just like, there's some normal, like, well, normal as in like wealthy, but just like average, whatever.
That Harry or Lloyd falls all in love with, and you know, drives him to the point of, oh, we need to get this briefcase back to her, and obviously, you know, the revelation at the end that she has a husband is kind of the final nail to drop in the coffin, which again is said several times, even
or
in
implied. Yeah, I don't think it's explicitly said, but it is very much implied a lot. Well, there is that scene, I guess, with Charlie Rock when Charlie Rock first comes in the movie. It's so kind of obvious that's what they're talking about. That, but yeah, they don't know that. But yeah. She's good. I mean, she's only in so much of it. I mean, her acting in particular during the fantasy sequence is commendable. Yeah, which we'll probably talk about more in detail here in a little while.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's good. Karen Duffy is J.P. Shea, a henchwoman of Nicholas Andre. Come on, let me do them. Let me do both of them. You don't even have to worry about it. Like, how could you whack a bird with a cork? Like, I'm not sure what else she's been in. Let's see.
I can't think of anything offhand.
Malcolm X. She was in, supposedly.
I think I barely do remember
Last
her.
Action Hero.
Yeah.
Fantastic Mr. Fox. Really?
Who was she in that?
Linda Otter voice, obviously.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, she's only in a little bit of it, but it's funny, she lasts longer than Mike Starr.
Yeah.
Who is Joe Mentalino, a henchman for Nicholas Andre. He has a stomach ulcer and regularly takes medication for it.
Oh, that's a good,
That's one of my favorite jokes in the movie is when they see them outside the door coming to look for him.
Yeah.
And they're like, did you pay the gas bill? You realize what you've done?
I say we bail.
Yeah. He's like, okay. Yeah. And then, like, of course, they said, he's like, maybe I'll trash the place, send him a little message. And she's like, I don't think it'd be much of a message. The guy has worms in his living room. But yeah, and then they're like, sorry, gas man. Went to Aspen. Of course, Aspen spelled with an I.
Yeah. And then a smile.
Right.
Smiley
And he's
face.
like, how the hell do they know I got gas? Like, but obviously Mike Starr is in like everything. He's in Goodfellas, Black Dynamite. I think he was originally on The Young and the Restless. Actually, Radio Days, The Natural, New York Stories, Uncle Buck. He was in. Look at all the movies he was in 1989 alone. Born on 4th of July, Blue Steel, that Catherine Bigelow.
Yeah.
Movie.
The Bodyguard.
Son of the Pink Panther. Wait a minute. Wait, Roberto Benigni played the Pink Panther?
Yeah, I forgot that.
Never know that.
He played Clouseau.
Okay, these are all the movies he was in 1994. Cabin Boy, The Hudsucker Proxy, On Deadly Ground, Blown Away, Baby's Day Out, Trial by Jury, Ed Wood, and Dumb and Dumber.
Wow.
Like,
banner year.
And he's pretty memorable in most of those, too, that I've seen anyway. A Pyromaniac's Love Story. William Baldwin, John Leguizamo. Well, I've never heard of that.
James and the Giant Peach.
Yeah. Anyway, he's been in a lot of stuff. But yeah, he's really great. And there was a Gloria remake.
Really?
With Sharon Stone. Sidney Lumet. What?
I had no idea of that.
I
had no idea.
George C. Scott. I had no idea. But yeah, and they both work for Charlie Rocket's character, Nicholas Andre, a greedy, wealthy resident of Aspen, Colorado, and the mastermind behind Bobby's
So he's
kidnapping.
the main villain of the movie.
Charlie Rocket, thoughts?
Well, I've not seen a lot of him. He used to be on SNL,
Right,
notably, and
Yeah.
I think he said that F bomb.
Yeah,
He dropped the F bomb on live
he dropped
TV.
the F bomb and got fired. And then he later committed suicide. Randomly. He's also known as Charlie Hamburger, which always makes me laugh. His real name was Charles Adams Claveri, or Clevere. I don't know how to say that. He's from Maine originally. He basically committed suicide in October of 2005.
Okay.
But yeah, I know that he was on that show Moonlighting too. But yeah, basically what happened was, I'm reading here, it was something that it was like a Dallas Who Shot JR thing, and he said, I'd like to know who effing did it or whatever. And I guess it was like, you're fired or whatever.
But we always quote the audition of
Phil Hartman.
Where
he's like, I wouldn't say F live on the air. I wouldn't want to be the next Charlie Rocket, would you?
Yeah. And then it turned out he had his own awful death.
But yeah, he's a good villain, I think, actually.
Then again, I think he's mostly playing it straight. But then, as you said, there are moments like, I want the vegetarian meal, you know.
And like, I love that scene where Mike Starr's on the phone in the phone booth, which, by the way, has that one guy who's who was on Ned's Declassified and has been in a bunch of random
He's
stuff.
been on Seinfeld.
Yeah. And that he's like freaking out because it's like he can't have been on the phone that long.
Yeah, right.
Who would he need to call other than him? Unless he's been making all these other calls or something. I don't know. But he's like, and he's talking on the phone. So swing in this S, and I want to know who they are and what they're doing with it. It's like intentionally kind of over the top comedic. But yeah, he's a good villain, I think. Kind of randomly in there. Terry Garr is Helen Swanson, Mary's stepmother. And then also, the guy I was thinking of earlier, Hank Brandt, is Carl Swanson, Mary's father. I don't think I've ever seen him.
They're pretty perfunctory, whatever. It's kind of like, love Terry Garr and all these things she's been in, but then she's barely in it. Could have used more of her. I don't know in what context.
Yeah, she's pretty good. Victoria Rowell as Beth Jordan, credited as Athletic Beauty. Didn't know that. FBI
I saw
agent,
that in the credits when we were watching. I was like, what part was that?
An FBI agent masquerading as a talkative young woman moving to Aspen to get away from her boyfriend. He came home drunk and wanted to fix the sink. I couldn't believe it.
She's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Obviously, it turns out she's an FBI agent undercover.
It's probably one of my favorite kind of scenes in the movie is her and Harry talking at the gas pump. And obviously one of my favorite jokes in the movie is like, "Are those your skis?" Yeah. Both of them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. and then obviously where he's like getting her number and he had lit the match and it's like got the gas all over his leg. And
for God's sake, just give me the D number.
Yeah. It's just like, all right, if you're gonna be pushy, forget about it. Yeah. But yeah. And then one of my other favorite line readings is later in the movie where he's like, "What if he shot me in the face?" She's like, "That was a risk we were willing to take." But yeah, she's really good. She's not in the movie a whole lot, but I love that. Yeah, those scenes where she's like hanging out at the bar, and Lloyd's there waiting on Mary, who never shows up, and like her just aggravating him the whole time. But, Cam Neely is Seabass. a hot-tempered trucker who gets into frequent confrontations with Lloyd and Harry on their way to Aspen. First encounters at a Pennsylvania diner.
I love Pennsylvania specifically. Let's hyperlink that. Seabass is, obviously this random trucker basically that they get into.
What the hell do you want?
A tussle
One
with.
of my favorite line
I love too. Like one of my favorite moments in all of Jeff Daniels' acting career is the look he gives when he throws the salt shaker. Just total
Who's
oblivious.
the dead man that hit me with a salt shaker.
But just the look of just total nothingness on his face, just like when he throws it, just like. And then obviously Seabass pops up again, shockingly in the stall. As getting ready to apparently. He's gonna rape. Lloyd.
Well, this movie kind of obviously has kind of a homophobia problem, as well as there's something about Mary with randomly Harlan Williams, who's in this movie as the motorcycle police officer, as that like serial killer. And there's something about Mary.
Yeah.
One great thing about that whole sequence though is the whole scene that happens with the cops, where he's like, "How often have you done this?" And he's like, "Oh, a bunch of times. I don't know."
Yeah, and obviously Ben Stiller's talking about hitchhiking, but they think he's talking about killing people.
Right, which is funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, Seabass is really great, I think, in the main sequence. Yeah. I like the shock factor of the second sequence, but it's kind of weird about, like, I feel like the edited version is a better version of that. Like, the longer, uncensored version is a little bit too much, I think, of, like, some of that stuff.
It should also be said that I believe he pops up in the post-credit scene.
Yeah, because we really needed that.
Of Dumb and Dumber 2.
Right.
So there's that.
Yeah.
But,
but yeah, I mean, he's funny. Joe Baker is Bernard. He's the guy that's the concierge or whatever that's like always helping them out all the time.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot to say about him. But Harlan Williams, we mentioned about the motorcycle police officer. That's a pretty random sequence where it's like, oh, he has to pee real bad after they had like run out and all that money. By the way, we forgot to mention one of our favorite jokes in the movie too is when they go up to tell that woman that Seabass is going to pay for their food, which of course they're lying about. She's reading a book that says, "Of course you're angry." Like, this is random because she's just like sitting there, like whatever.
Seemed like a very relatively nice, calm woman.
Yeah, it's like, of course you're angry. Yeah. But yeah, Harlan Williams is the guy. Been boozing, have you? Sucking down Grandpa's old cough medicine? Let me hear you, pumpkin pie hair-cutted freak. Brad Lockerman is Bobby Swanson, Mary's kidnapped husband. He's barely in the movie.
Literally one scene.
Nothing. Yeah. Lynn Shay is Mrs. Margie Nugaborn, referred to as by Harry as Mrs. Nugiburger, a dog owner and client of Harry's.
And she's like freaking out because he had total disregard for how the dogs were going to look, basically how they were treated on the way to the dog show they were being taken to or whatever.
Right, and yeah. Brady Blum is Billy, a blind and young boy who uses a wheelchair to whom Lloyd sold some of his and Harry's belongings, including Harry's decapitated parakeet. He appears on a current affair when Harold and Lloyd arrive in Aspen.
What do we think of this? This would be a time to talk about this with other Farrelly Brother movies, is their use of disabled or mentally challenged people in their movies. Do we feel like he's being made fun of because of his blindness explicitly in this?
Well, sort of. I mean, and this is a more complicated one, I think, than W. Earl Brown in There's Something About Mary, because I think that's actually overall a relatively positive.
Yeah. There's been a lot of debate and talk about that over the years, and they've said, and they have even they have friends who are mentally challenged that they put in specifically to Something About Mary.
And also roles. With that movie too, specifically, it's clear the whole movie that Ben Stiller is always really nice to him. Yeah. And always including him in whatever's going on, to the point where it's like, no, this is really how someone should treat this person, and it's clear that Matt Dillon's character is just insane.
Total
is
psycho.
Not doing that, right? Yeah. But with this, it's a little bit murkier, to the point where I do kind of wonder about that.
Yeah, I think the criticisms that are fair in this.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think it is really funny, though, just the image of a dead bird with like the thing that's funny about it to me is not so much making fun of the kid as it is anybody who would see that clearly dead and not step in and say something about it. They would all just
and then
be
later
like,
on when he's on that current affair episode that Mary seeing it on
just
TV.
thought he was really quiet.
She said, "Who are these sick people?" And then immediately the doorbell rings
Right.
and Harry or Lloyd's there.
That's such a random throwback of like those shows like A Current Affair and Hard Copy and those shows that no one even talks
Inside
about.
Edition's
now.
the closest
Right.
thing that it would even perpetrate.
But those were always a little more serious, kind of like 48 Hours or that type of thing. Like, but it's just a different kind of show. But yeah, that whole set. I always thought that as a kid. I always thought that kid was kind of that he was looked like, oh gosh, what's his name? That kid that's in Secondhand Lines and his name just escaped me. Like literally, I had it and then I forgot. Everybody's screaming it at us right now.
Real close. Haley Joel Osment.
Yeah, Haley Joel Osment.
Sixth Sense, famously.
Right. Yeah, and I always thought that was him when I was a kid.
Yeah, he does look like him.
And then Connie Sawyer is an elderly lady. Now, it's actually important to note that she
looks like a younger version of who she is. Older.
Yeah, that she was in Pineapple Express also, and When Harry Met Sally. She was 105, was the oldest working actress in Hollywood, with a career spanning 85 years.
She only died in 2018.
Right. So, yeah, she was because I was going to say, I was like, she was old in that, like...
Yeah.
So she was in a bunch of stuff. But yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie too, is when he's like, let's get the bare essentials, that's the last of our dough. What do I look like? Immediately cuts to him with that massive hat, beer.
Pinwheels.
And that's my favorite detail of the scene is the pinwheels. Also his purchase of Rhode Island Slut.
Yeah.
It's like the name of the like,
and the look
fake,
in his eyes when he's doing it
and
too.
He's like, cripes. And meanwhile, playing in the background is "Red Right Hand" by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which is the first time I'd ever heard that song.
Yeah,
which has randomly been used in specifically a lot of things, but specifically in Scream, in the Scream movies, I think have used that song multiple times.
Okay.
But yeah, that whole scene's funny just because.
She like leaves,
Right, he leaves. He's like, he didn't have to say any of this whatsoever, but it's like, hey, I just realized like something's like that old people, while slow and dangerous behind the wheel,
can still serve a purpose.
Don't you go dying on me,
Yeah.
and that she's immediately like, almost steal his stuff. Yeah, but and that she lied at first about change. No, I don't.
Yeah,
right. Oh, as he says.
Now all these side characters are a chance to talk about the Farrelly Brothers style of comedy, which is not exactly like Airplane, as you said, but it certainly shares some DNA with it in the sense of it has a loose plot structure of this happened. The MacGuffin, we got to get the briefcase back to Mary, and that just gives this big open assembly to kind of then like have a series of scenes that almost don't exactly play like vignettes, but certainly allow room and space for their own ways to do things. And I mean, similarly, I do think like there is a little bit more plot going on in Something About Mary.
Yeah.
But it's similar in terms of they love like kind of setting up a scenario or situation and then letting... And I'm sure things happen. I'm sure some of their things are improvised, but I would imagine some of them are scripted too, and it's about a little bit finding the movie as it's happening, but also cutting the things that just do not work.
Right. Yeah, and I mean...
Which happens frequently with comedy.
Yeah,
anyways.
well, and that's kind of my favorite type of movie because, like, my favorite movie ever is Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and that's all just an excuse to have all these characters that are these weird, eccentric people.
And that similarly has a pretty straightforward MacGuffin plot engine.
And even a movie like Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, which was a more modern version of this that just came out. And so I just love movies that do that. I feel like you can get the most out of comedy with that by just having all these characters and all these things
Austin Power movies to an extent but they have that time travel some aspects to it.
And Mustafa, of course.
With Will Ferrell,
But, and I just think what works so much about this is that you have so many different types of people in the movie because you have the people from Providence, like the regular, just average, everyday people living there. Then you have kind of the redneck folks. You have certain cops. You have other cops that are like chasing them. You have the people in Aspen who are like these upper crust, bougie people. Then you have them, obviously, and the mental character, all the people, the gangsters, and so there's all these different types of people, and so you can get a lot of different.
And they have their own absurdities, but ultimately, one thing that all these characters can agree on is that Harry and Lloyd are dumb and dumber indeed.
Yeah,
right. That they are ultimately like the objects of fascination wherever they go. Ultimately, because no matter who's weird out there, they're always going to find a way to ratchet it up to some extent. But, what do we think about the whole? Now, you've not seen Dumb and Dumber 2.
No.
But what do you think about the prospects of even a sequel to this movie?
I feel like it's kind of. I mean, it's weird because I feel like it's lightning in a bottle that's so great, but it's to the point where it's like, no, I feel like we could use more of it. Like, it's just kind of a bottomless. That energy and charisma between them, I think, is so palatable. Or palpable, rather.
And is immediately essential and recognizable where you're like, oh, we could take them and put them in all these different scenarios and situations.
Yeah, and so in that way, we got something instead like Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, which a lot of people like us at the time were talking about was the female Dumb and Dumber in its own way.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a version that we've seen of that is like, yeah, you can still do that type of thing, but to do a sequel, I don't know, because I feel like what really worked about this one is that the plot was so simple, and there was a simple MacGuffin, and it was about desire in a romantic sense, but also just about travel and
testing this bromance,
right? And I feel like we kind of did it, and it's like, okay,
I think it's one of those. I think a movie like this is the ultimate scenario you can find of like something that's so good that like you want to see it redone over and over again, but actually it's like, well, we should have just left it as the one thing because it's always going to be iconic as that one thing. And again, I don't even remember all that much about Dumb and Dumber 2. I remember just not liking it and feeling like it just fell flat, and that also there was a slightly pathetic thing about seeing these actors older, and not that they're older, but then they're trying to look like they did in the 90s, and it was just like, it just doesn't. It just makes you feel like almost bad for the whole thing, and just that why is this happening? And then what really got me one of the worst things about it is that Dumb and Dumber 2 ends with like a clip show almost of the original movie.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, I love that. Why didn't you just re-show that again? Why didn't you just re-release that so I could see that on a big screen? Why do we have to do all this? And I don't know the exact history of that project, but I would imagine that was always this golden calf for everyone involved. That we don't want to just do it for no reason. We gotta wait on the right script and the right idea, and that was certainly not it. I don't know why they got confused on that, but one thing that is immediately memorable about this movie is the soundtrack, which is by far one of the strangest soundtracks I can think of for any movie. And again, was a little bit of a preview for ultimately the choices made in something like, I think, There's Something About Mary, which is not exactly as obviously crazy as this is, but certainly has those like little vignettes that play out of Jonathan Richman that interrupt the movie and are just like, oh, by the way, this is going on now. And it's like, okay. And that was the first time I really got to know Jonathan Richman. And it makes so much sense the Farrellys would be into him based on the weird offbeat music they use in Dumb and Dumber's soundtrack. What impression or legacy to you does the Dumb and Dumber soundtrack leave, just as a function in the movie and as its own thing?
Okay, so in the movie first, I guess. First of all, it's just so... I mean, I feel like all the music choices are exact. I mean, it's like very much like we want to elicit this. I mean, it's a great soundtrack as far as just like saying we want this here, and it works really well. It just underlines the whole movie with the patina of just nonsense that is... When we joke about the movie, half the stuff we joke about is based on the music that is accompanying the nonsense. I mean, and of course Todd Rundgren also did a lot of songs for the movie too, more of the like score for it. But I mean, I think it functions so well to the point where it almost is something outside the movie itself. It's just so funny. I want to talk about a couple of these. First of all, the Boom Shakalak, which is the opening song. It immediately is like, oh yeah, this is what by Apache Indian. Is immediately like, yep, there you go. Red Right Hand, we already mentioned the use of. Always random to me that song Get Ready, which was a cover of, well, I think Smokey Robinson wrote it, but it was made famous by Rare Earth, that band, and so that's a random inclusion. 2 Foot of Butt Crack, which we laugh about all the time.
Well, I've not heard the whole song and really studied the lyrics in of themselves, but 2 feet of butt crack,
which is of course performed by Circle the Wagon, which is just but 2 foot of butt crack was all I could see is all that I've ever heard of the song.
And then a preview of sorts for a shot involving Jeff Daniels.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's some other songs here. A lot of these I just know by the sound. I don't know by their name exactly, but my
Pretty
favorite
Woman.
overall, has got to be New Age Girl by Dead-Eye Dick, which is Mary Mo.
Yeah.
Like
She's a vegetarian.
Mary Mo. We literally say that all the time. Like, it's probably actually the biggest thing we reference from this movie.
Yeah.
And then
he wanted a vegetarian meal.
Yeah. And then one of my other favorite is If You Don't Love Me, I'll Kill Myself, which is the random moment where they're like Harry and Mary are on their like date or whatever. And they're like having this like snowball fight.
Like she's meaning to be playful, and he immediately just ratchets up to unnecessary levels.
Yeah, but if you don't love me, I'll kill myself.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of great like inclusions here. Just a lot of question marks and.
And I've never really bought this. We should buy the CD and just listen to it as its own separate thing, because it's just such a rando. Aspect. What legacy comedically within the 90s and then in general do you just think this movie leaves?
It's a movie that I mentioned to my kids at school when they were all automatically like, oh yeah, Dumb and Dumb. It's like a movie that I feel like certain people like to talk about on a guilty pleasure level for some reason.
As we said earlier,
but everybody loves it so much. I mean, like everybody I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, Dumb and Dumber, and it's on TV all the time. I mean, it's literally on cable.
You think part of that is just because of that, and because of it's just generations of people have now aged with it and don't feel the need to apologize for liking it.
So.
Yeah,
I think
some that still exists.
For a time, and especially people our age and kids even younger, that everybody just accepts this is hilarious, we love it, whatever. But yeah, I feel like that's common with a lot, and I feel like this movie made it more acceptable to like that type of movie because it was so funny and beloved, and it had these stars in it, and it was just such a kind of big deal. And also I think just by nature of it coming out at Christmas time, it got more of an audience than it normally would get in its own way, and I think that might be significant to its success, maybe. I think
a lot of it too, again, it was popular on home video. I watched it on VHS a decent amount, but also on TV. I mean, even the edited versions.
Yeah, because when I grew up as a kid, I watched it more on like a recorded
TBS,
VHS.
I think it was.
Right, the TBS version of it, And
which edits things out, but the movie's so funny enough that it's not like if you take like Something About Mary, which I'm a huge fan of, and I've only seen in more recent years. But like when you cut moments of and aspects of that, it will actually water down the movie. You can cut things out of this for little things to make it TV accessible, and it doesn't really neuter the movie all that much compared to something like that.
Because I mean,
that's also just rated R.
The toilet scene also just like is so funny, but it doesn't have to show anything.
Right.
So it's probably one of the nastiest scenes in any movie I've ever seen that doesn't show us anything. Really. But
it's all about Jeff Daniels.
So technically you can't cut anything.
Foley effects
right.
too,
Technically you can't cut anything from that. So it's kind of like I guarantee you the censors had a hard time with that because it's so nasty. But it's like, well, nothing's happening, like, other than But, and of course, that flush you beasters.
Yeah. Again, that was all an appetizer to Franks and Beans and that whole moment, and obviously that. And that actually does show something semi-graphic, obviously.
Right. So I think that's what's so great about the movie is that it allowed people to like that type of movie almost, but people still have trouble with that one sometimes. But also, nothing that's come after that has been that good either.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of that type of movie that people can all rally around and say they like, it's kind of hard to get there and do that. So
So that's Dumb and Dumber from 1994. Again, check out that and Stranger in Paradise back to back. I think they'll again,
I think it does line up pretty
combination.
well, and I think you came up with that pairing,
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting because I wouldn't have thought of those two movies together. But they're both totally different types of movies, but about very similar things, I think. And so,
and both great in their own ways.
Mhm.
So that does it for these weeks.
Back in the days.
Episode. But Jeff Probst, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
I'm just living the dream. That's unbelievable. Oh man, I feel like, wow. It's like I come over, it's like I don't know what to expect. I gotta be honest. I come in, it's like a little like I'm trying to get my bearings. There's cartoons, your mom, and it's like you still got it. Look at her. Just living the dream. I love that. You know what? I will have some meatloaf. Let's have some meatloaf. You want some? Yes. I knew you'd come. Hey, Mom! The meatloaf! We want it now! The meatloaf! What is she doing? I never know what she's doing back there. Just living the dream. Where'd you get that girl? She's hot. I got her yesterday. Yesterday? Yeah. I rode my bike over to a cemetery nearby. Her boyfriend just died. You met her at a funeral? Yeah. Dude died in a hang gliding accident. What an idiot. Oh, I'm hang gliding, honey. Take a good picture. I'm dead. What a freak. You met her at a funeral? Yeah, I'll throw in a wedding every now and then. But funerals are insane. The chicks are so horny, it's not even fair. It's like fishing with dynamite. Horny? Yeah, crazy horny. I just... at a funeral? Grief is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac. Huh. Look it up. I didn't know that. That's what I've learned. Ma, the meatloaf! Fuck!
Patrick, thanks so much for looking after Courtney. Dorcia, how impressive. How on earth did you get a reservation there?
Lucky, I guess.
That's a wonderful suit. Don't tell me, let me guess. Valentino Couture.
Uh-huh.
It looks so soft.
Your compliment was sufficient, Louis.
Hello, Halberstram. Nice tie. How the hell are you?
Alan has mistaken me for this dighead Marcus Halberstram. It seems logical because Marcus also works at P&P and in fact does the same exact thing I do. He also has a penchant for Valentino's suits and Oliver Peoples' glasses. Marcus and I even go to the same barber, although I have a slightly better haircut.
So how's the ransom account going, Marcus?
It's all right.
Really? That's interesting. It's not great.
Oh, well, you know.
So how's Cecilia? She's a great girl.
Oh, yeah. I'm very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Alan. Congratulations on the Fisher account.
Thank you, Baxter.
Listen, Paul, squash.
Call me.
What, Friday?
No can do. I got an 8:30 res at Dorcia. Great. Sea urchin ceviche.
Dorcia on Friday night. How do you swing that? I think he's lying. Is that a gram?
New card. What do you think?
Whoa. Very nice. Look at that.
Picked them up from the printers yesterday.
Good coloring.
That's bone. And the lettering is something called Cillian Braille.
It's very cool, Bateman, but that's nothing. Look at this. That is really nice. Eggshell with Romalian type. What do you think? Nice. Jesus. That is really super. How'd a nitwit like you get so tasteful?
I can't believe that Bryce prefers Van Patten's card to mine.
But wait. You ain't seen nothing yet. Raised lettering. Pale nimbus. White.
Impressive. Very nice. Let's see Paul Allen's card. Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my God. It even has a watermark.
Something wrong? Patrick? You're sweating.
Mom, the meatloaf! So, what you just heard was 2 clips, one of which was from Wedding Crashers from 2005, I believe, and American Psycho from 2000. Now, see, when we originally came up with this idea of, let's maybe transition to doing these double feature pairings, there's a website, I can't remember what it was, that you can like put in like the number of random movies, I think that's taken from IMDb, and it just gives you these random combos or like series of how many ever you pick. And this was one early on that I just said like, all right, 2 random movies and hit it. And it generated a bunch of random ones. And, you know, we actually, some of the other movies we'll be doing eventually are from that list. But one of the pairings was Wedding Crashers and American Psycho. And I immediately laughed because I was like, oh my God. I've actually not even seen Wedding Crashers, by the way.
We haven't.
We haven't. We're going to be watching this.
This will be the first movie that we've ever watched for the pod that is
we have not seen. Yeah, as a subject of the pod. But you know what it is. I mean, you've seen the clips here and there. Now we've both seen American Psycho, so we both already have knowledge.
It's been some years
understanding
ago.
of that.
Yeah.
But immediately I laughed. And I'm like, oh my God, these are both
fact,
about like either man-children and/or sociopathic toxic masculinity.
Right.
And it's just funny that one's obviously a very rip-roaring mainstream R-rated comedy, and one is a very dark, twisted satire, though, in its own way. I mean, that scene we played of the cards and showing those off is a very openly satirical scene that wants you to laugh at the absurdity that these characters are putting into the importances of that. But I immediately saw that pairing and laughed. I said, we got to do this for the pod. So, and it will be a chance for us to watch the Wedding Crashers and maybe talk about, actually compare even a little bit how comedy from the 90s was changing by the comedy of the 2000s as far as in a mainstream way already by that point. I'd say we're big fans of Owen Wilson in terms of especially his work within Wes Anderson's films. Vince Vaughn, a little more nonplussed.
I've liked him in certain things, but overall... I mean, he's a great leading man for the S. Craig Zoller movies. I mean, literally, you want to talk about violence in movies. Literally, the ending of Brawl in Cell Block 99 is literally probably one of the most violent things I've ever seen. It's just like, that whole movie is one of the most violent things ever. But
But I've seen clips of Wedding Crashers, and they make a good pairing. I think.
I would think
so. For a rom-com
I remember when that movie came out, it was a big deal. It was a big home video hit. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you or not, and I was thinking about talking about this next week, but I'll bring it up briefly. At our church many years ago, and I'll tell you off air who it was. It's not a big deal or anything, but I'll just to not mention them. Somebody at our church, they had a minivan, and I got in the back of it one time for something, and an empty Wedding Crashers DVD case was in the back of their vehicle, and I've always remembered that as being like, what? What was so random was that it was empty. It wasn't even in there, and it was just like, where was
the old MacGuffin?
It might have even been from Flick Video. I can't remember, which is a video store we had around here. But I don't remember that for sure.
Okay.
But I've always remembered that, and so it's finally going to be like, we're finally going to get to watch this movie. I've always wanted to randomly do it, but
talk a little bit about American Psycho. This movie and the book, of course, written by Bret Easton Ellis, was a huge deal when it came out. Now we've not read the book, but we've seen the movie. Very controversial. I think the movie is almost critic-proof in the sense of there are things about the narrative you can critique, but also as a satire that allows it to kind of say, well, it was all a joke or part of the game or part of the story or whatever. And Bret Easton Ellis is kind of his own slightly obnoxious figure who revels in being controversial.
He's been lightly canceled, but not totally, I think, but based on some homophobic things he said or something.
Well,
but then it turned out he is gay, and so he basically had to out himself, I think, based on some stuff that happened or something. I don't remember all the details about that. We'll look that up before next week.
Now, and I feel like
he's randomly sort of best friends with Donna Tartt, who wrote The Goldfinch.
Which is random.
They went to the same writing school together. So they were big they were like best friends back when they first kind of started
Now,
writing.
Again, I'm trying to say this as a very historically conscious person, obviously. I feel like even in the late 80s, early 90s, to make the links between Wall Street and being a serial killer was not the biggest, most original leaps to make, I gotta say. Even then, in the early 90s or when it came out. Nonetheless, it is a metaphor and a satirical template that obviously is making a statement about the 80s, which we were already ragging on a little bit earlier. And just this sense of like hustle culture that certainly was in keeping in the 80s and in its own way is still alive now. What do you think in general about the narrative of American Psycho as satire or as a work of its own way horror?
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier when we were going to talk about this, is I was saying that I don't really like this movie, at least in memory, but that I really love and respect the concept and think it's really important that, that isn't that big of a leap to make, but he was kind of the first to really make that leap.
What do we think of Christian Bale's performance in it?
I mean, he's really good, I think, in it, and it asks a lot of him. So I'll be happy to watch the movie again because I haven't seen it in a long time,
truly one of the most chilling things I've ever seen in a movie is where he's like doing the skin peel off his face, and he talks about Patrick Bateman as a performance and the abstraction of Patrick Bateman and all that. Even still, in isolation, is a very chilling scene that I still keep with me. So, we're going to be talking about Wedding Crashers and American Psycho next week. But before we head out this week, I wanted to play, just in tribute to John Lurie and the Lounge Lizards, one of my very favorite tracks from Voice of Chunk, which was their third album, my personal favorite album from them. Paper Bag and The Sun, mostly as was the case with most of their stuff, instrumental. But yeah, any last thoughts on this episode, Levi, before we get played out here?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right, so this is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you.